Chapter 87. Fresh Peaches. 1. In the end, Madame Rong couldn't gather the courage to step forward and could only quietly place the jade amulet in her hands back into her sleeves. The people around her noted her hesitation and her eventual decision to not participate in the wager. Some of the madams nearby immediately rolled their eyes. Madame Rong had no choice but to keep her indignation at their reactions to herself. Miss Su was more clever and understood that this wasn't something that an unmarried young lady like her should join in, so she could only watch what was happening from the crowd. On the other hand, Miss Yuan kept staring at the sparkling accessories on the silver tray, her greed showing in her eyes. The 20 or so accessories in that tray were all extraordinary items. If all of them were to become hers, she would likely go mad from the euphoria. Thus, she couldn't help the traces of jealousy and hatred leaking from her gaze when she looked at Chu Lian. She fervently hoped that Chu Lian would lose. When Chu Lian's gaze turned to Madame Rong, she noticed that Madame Rong had her head lowered and didn't dare to meet her eyes. She smiled inwardly, but didn't take Madame Rong's actions to heart. House Jinggan's third young madam, this way please. Madame Huang slightly raised her voice, the corners of her lips tilting upwards. Although her tone was neither hot nor cold, her eyes carried clear contempt for Chu Lian. Chu Lian stood amongst the crowd, dressed rather plainly compared to the others, but her fearless expression invoked praise and approval from the crowd. She bobbed in greeting to the ladies before her and said, "Dear madams, if you would kindly send some people to follow me to the kitchen as witnesses." Madame Huang hadn't expected that Chu Lian would bring up a request like that, but she saw no harm in acquiescing to it. She immediately waved her hand to send 2 of her senior servants with Chu Lian. Lady Yang did the same. As the crowd watched Chu Lian leading her maidservants and the 4 senior servants off to the kitchen of May Court, the sounds of fervent gossiping grew in volume. Madame Huang inwardly scoffed as a maidservant helped her to a seat. She didn't believe that an unfavored little girl from House Ingwa could work her way out of a situation like this. Don't assume that you're craftier than the rest of us, just because your womb is a little more fertile than most. Lady Yang sat right next to Madame Huang. Her maidservant passed her a cup of freshly brewed sancha, which she received and took a small sip from. Then, she smiled before speaking to Madame Huang. "What's wrong? Are you already scared of losing that precious pearl bracelet of yours, Madame Huang?" "Lady Yang, the longevity peach buns haven't even come out of the kitchen yet. How are you so sure that you've already won?" The 2 of them exchanged looks full of hidden daggers. The madams standing around them shivered as chills ran down their spines. They all tried to shrink into the background. None of them wanted to accidentally become a pawn in the battle between the 2 fearsome madams, like Chu Lian had. At Qingfeng Court, right across from May Court, the azure eyes watching from the 3rd-floor window glimmered. They filled with humor as the man murmured to himself in a low voice that Sanlang has gotten a rather interesting wife for himself. The man waved his hand and the shadow within the room appeared once again. "Tell the men to retreat for now. This prince wants to see what this 6th Miss Chu can do." "As you wish, master." In the same building, down at the veranda facing the pond, a manservant dressed in blue was whispering into the ears of Heir Zhenghua. While watching the crowd across the pond, Heir Zhenghua's eyes immediately lit up. "Is that so? Heir Zhenghua, this servant dare not hide a thing. Then go quickly. Once you have news, report to me immediately." In his urgency, Heir Zhenghua kicked the manservant's bottom. The manservant simply laughed and ran off. Chapter 88. Fresh Peaches. 2. Xiaobojian was still standing in the same spot. Within just 3 steps, Heir Zhenghua made it to his side and tried to strike up a conversation. "Senior Xiao, guess what's happening across the pond? Haha, it's really lively. I didn't think something so interesting would happen at Old Marquis Dingyuan's longevity feast. I haven't made this trip in vain." If it weren't for the fact that the crowd over there was entirely female and that Heir Zhenghua wasn't engaged yet, he would probably have gone over to take a look himself, thanks to his busybody nature. Xiaobojian glanced calmly at Heir Zhenghua. His features were already finer than a woman's, but now that he was pressing his already thin lips together, the combination of his expression and beauty made him look as if he was holding back his desire. Even as a straight man himself, Heir Zhenghua was almost dazzled by that scene. Zhenghua, please get straight to the point. I dislike beating around the bush. Zhenghua wasn't put off by Xiao Bojian's cold attitude. He was used to his senior's icy chill and seeming disinterest in everything, so he thought there was no point in teasing him anyway. He explained everything that had happened to Xiao Bojian immediately. When he began to speak of the more exciting parts, Zhenghua would even tisk in admiration. That's right. Speaking of this third young madam from House Jingon, wasn't she the one who made those raindrop matchas that grandmother brought back for us a few days ago? Since she could make desserts like those, these longevity peach buns must be nothing to her. Haha, Madame Huang's going to lose terribly today. I really can't wait to see the annoyed expression on her face. A huge wave of emotion rose within Xiao Bojian's chest, even as he appeared calm while listening to Zhenghua's words. His thin lips pressed together again, almost forming a straight line. His slender fingers grasping the railing of the veranda also tightened. Even more thoughts were swirling inside his head. How on earth had Lianer provoked Imperial Princess Liao? It was clear that the whole incident was a trap. Zhou Yuanqin, Imperial Princess Liao, and Madame Huang were all on the same side. What was that Lady Yang plotting to push Lianer into the thick of things like that? And that he Changdi, since he had already married her, why had he treated her that way? That kind of man didn't deserve to have Lianer. A storm was brewing in Xiao Bojian's almond-shaped eyes as his heart clenched tightly. He hated himself a little for not having any power. He couldn't even help Chu Lian when she was in need of help, and he could only let her face those troubles on her own. Since he Sanlang wasn't worthy of her, then don't blame him for stealing her back. All these people who were making trouble for Lianer today, he would pay them back in the future. Meanwhile, Chu Lian was busy teaching her two maidservants how to knead the dough in the kitchen. If she were able to hear Xiao Bojian's current thoughts, she would surely roll her eyes at him. She would even offer him a reply. Shu, go stand somewhere else. Don't interfere with my money-making. Does your mum know how warped your thinking is? Unfortunately, Chu Lian didn't know of what was going on in Xiao Bojian's mind. She was busy as a bee in the kitchen. The four senior servants who had followed her here were Madame Huang and Lady Yang's people. None of them could help in making the buns. Since Dean Restaurant's Mr. Wang had made the longevity peach buns in this exact kitchen a while ago, she didn't lack any of the necessary ingredients. With Xiyin and Winching helping her, Chu Lian could speed up her cooking. At first, the four senior servants had kept a close eye on the proceedings from the side. Madame Huang's senior servants had even seemed to have grown eyes on the top of their head from all their staring. However, as time passed, the senior servants' eyes all widened. Madame Huang's servants were so anxious that cold sweat started appearing on their bodies. However, they couldn't leave at all, due to Lady Yang's servants watching them. Chapter 89. Fresh Peaches, 3. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Chu Lian worked without any sense of urgency and was able to produce a few baskets of longevity peach buns within an hour. The four servants tried to peek as Chu Lian brought the longevity peach buns out of the steamer, but Chu Lian purposely blocked their gazes so that none of them had a good view of the buns. Chu Lian washed her hands and led her maidservants and the witnessing senior servants back to May Court. All the women in May Court immediately focused on Chu Lian before their eyes turned to the box that Xiyin was carrying. Curiosity itched inside their hearts. They wished for the power to see through things so that they could have a peek at what House Jing'an's third young madam made. The four senior servants accompanying Chu Lian hurriedly returned to their own masters. Madame Huang's servant whispered a few lines into her ear, causing Madame Huang's expression to change. She asked in return, "Are you certain?" The senior servant nodded and said, "This old servant didn't get to see what the end result was, and didn't get the chance to taste it. House Jing'an's third young madam purposely hid the buns from us the moment she took them out of the steamer." Upon hearing the senior servant's reply, the tension on Madame Huang's face faded away. If she tried to hide them, that meant she wasn't confident. Anyone could learn how to make longevity peach buns. She refused to believe that a young lady who had never stepped foot into the kitchen could make buns that tasted better than Mr. Wang's. After her servant had reported what she had seen, Madame Huang was even more certain that Chu Lian was simply acting the part. Furthermore, even if the buns looked good, it didn't mean that they would taste delicious. Before seeing them for herself, there was no need for her to get all flustered. That was just giving that hateful Lady Young a chance to mock her. The senior servant was about to say more, but Madame Huang waved her hand in dismissal. She could only close her mouth and retreat a few steps to stand in the corner. Her curiosity burned in her heart as she watched Chu Lian's every move. Chu Lian walked into the middle of the crowd with her maidservants and curtsied to each of the madams. "I've made you wait." Imperial Princess Liao glared at Chu Lian before sneering. "How fake. Princess, please don't get angry. All she can do is act the part. Let's wait until she brings out the longevity peach buns. We'll see if she can keep acting then," Zhou Yuanqing quickly said, trying to curry favor with the princess. "All right, don't stand on ceremony. Bring out the longevity peach buns," Lady Yang stated calmly. Chu Lian didn't tarry and instructed Shi Yan to place the box on the stone table in front of everyone. Then, she opened the box herself. Everyone's eyes were instantly concentrated on the box. All the people present, even Imperial Princess Liao and Royal Princess Duanjia, opened their eyes wide, afraid that they would miss a moment of this exciting event. If detect device equals desktop, Google Tag. Command push, function, Google Tag. Display, DIVGPT Advient. Miss Su nervously wrung the handkerchief in her hands while staring at the box. Madame Rome was both anxious and remorseful, with various emotions running through her heart. However, Miss Yuan couldn't even bear to pry her gaze away from the prizes on the tray. The crowd watched as Chu Lian took out 3 plates of perfectly sized peaches and placed them on the stone table. The peaches were vibrant and lovely, full and plump. There were even a few fresh, verdant leaves on the top of the peaches with water drops glistening on their surfaces. These were clearly fresh, sweet peaches that had just been plucked off a branch. The noble madams present stared at the peaches in a daze, and some of them even gaped in surprise. Suddenly, a young voice cried out in shock, "Those aren't fresh peaches. Those were made." The young girl's voice rang out clearly, traveling into the ears of everyone present. "What? Those weren't fresh peaches? They were longevity peach buns." The young girl realized that she had spoken out of turn and quickly covered her mouth. Her face flushed as she glanced at her mother beside her. The madam knew that her daughter had been lacking in manners, so she apologized to the madams around her. While apologizing, she explained, "When House Jing'an's 3rd young madam brought those buns out, I thought they were fresh peaches too. I didn't realize they were buns until I spotted the steam rising off these peaches." The young girl and madam were standing near the stone table, so they had quickly spotted the difference. After her explanation, all the madams in May Court were even more stunned. Those realistic longevity peach buns were really made of flour and weren't actually fresh peaches. Even Lady Yang and Wei Fengzi had their interest piqued. Madame Huang was staring straight at the buns with extreme disbelief in her eyes. The way she was tightly clutching onto her handkerchief revealed her unwillingness to concede. So what if they look realistic? It's not enough to win against Mr. Wang's longevity peach buns if they don't taste right. Imperial Princess Liao couldn't hold back her anger and was the first to reply. TL note: Chu Lian's peach buns are unreal. I can't find any pictures of super realistic edible peach buns. But here's the best I could find. Peach buns with leaves and one more picture taken from an actual menu. The restaurant is called Din Tai Fung. I'm not sure if it might be available near you, but give it a try if you can't. 3 peach buns. Chapter 90. Jackpot 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Chu Lian motioned Shi Yan and winching to pass the 2 plates of longevity peach buns around for the madams and young ladies present to taste. The buns weren't very big. Each one was about the size of an infant's fist. They were cute and finely made too, just about enough for 2 or 3 bites, so people wouldn't get sick of the taste. Xian first brought some buns over to Imperial Princess Liao before serving them to Madame Huang and the other madams behind her. As for winching, she served them to Royal Princess Duanjia first, then Lady Yang and so on. Once everyone had a peach bun in their hands, they could instantly tell that these were actually buns and not peaches. Royal Princess Duanjia pinched the soft peach bun in her hand and examined it seriously, just as if it was a novelty to her. When she sniffed it, she was surprised to find that it not only looked like the real thing, but even carried the clean, fresh aroma of real peaches. The ladies holding the adorable longevity peach buns couldn't bear to take a bite. Instead, they wanted to keep them like souvenirs and put them on display to admire how realistic they were every day. Royal Princess Duanjia blinked and parted her red, tender lips. She lightly bit into the bun, enjoying the soft, sweet texture of the skin. After biting into it, there was an unexpected flavor. Before Royal Princess Duanjia could think of what flavor it was, a young madam exclaimed in surprised joy, "There's a filling in this bun. It's soft, sticky, and sweet, and it's not too heavy on your tongue either." When Royal Princess Duanjia looked closely at it, she noted that the stuffing was indeed smooth and silky. It had the same color as red beans, so perhaps the stuffing was made of that? The women who had tasted Chulian's peach buns were all quiet. Even those who had been picking on Chulian had forgotten to speak. Why? Her peach buns were simply too delicious. Imperial Princess Liao and Madame Huang each took one bite. Their expressions simultaneously turned serious. Despite the frustration in their hearts, both of them still finished every bit of the little longevity peach bun in their hands. They couldn't help it. No matter how angry they were, their taste buds were begging for more. It only took one bite to make Lady Yang's eyes light up. She also had a sweet tooth. Upon seeing two buns left on the plate before her, she didn't wait for anyone else to react and swiped both of them for herself. Then, she swiftly finished them off with a few elegant movements. None of the ladies standing around Madame Rong were ranked highly enough to be part of the crowd that was tasting the buns. Madame Rong anxiously stared at the madams in the center. When she saw that Lady Yang had eaten 3 in one go, she finally relaxed. However, a pool of mixed feelings quickly replaced her previous anxiety. She regretted it a little now. If she had been decisive enough to stand by Chulian, she would be able to boast right now. Miss Su inwardly sighed in relief and smiled at Chulian. She had thought that this sixth sister of hers was too ambitious and arrogant in the past, and was too reckless in trying to make a name for herself. However, after this wild turn of events today, her opinion of Chulian changed a lot. She hadn't thought that sixth sister had such hidden talent. If detect device equals desktop Google Tag, command push function Google Tag, display DIVGPT advn. Miss Yuan had a death grip on the handkerchief in her hands. Her eyes were still locked on the accessories on the silver tray. Upon thinking that those were all Chulian's now, her heart was filled with jealousy. She was the daughter of a second wife, so when it came to status, she was actually ranked a little lower than Chulian. Thus, ever since she was little, she had always tried to compete with Chulian in anything and everything, and in every competition, she was the one who won. But now, Chulian was on the brink of winning an entire tray of treasures that none of her accessories could ever hope to compare to. How could she possibly bear to see that happen? Wei Fengzi finished eating the longevity peach bun in her hands. There was a spark of interest in the glance she tossed at Chulian. Her eyebrows raised as she said, "House Jing'an's third young madam has indeed made longevity peach buns that are more delicious than the ones made by Don Restaurant's Mr. Wang." Although the madams present already knew what the results would be, no one expected Wei Fengzi to be the one to announce it. When Imperial Princess Liao heard Wei Fengzi's words, she pouted unhappily. "Aunt, how could you side with outsiders?" Wei Fengzi looked at Imperial Princess Liao affectionately and sat next to the princess. She stroked the princess' hair. "Princess, I'm just stating the facts. Don't you think that these longevity peach buns are delicious?" Imperial Princess Liao couldn't lie in front of the aunt who had always pampered her. Furthermore, Chulian had indeed made peach buns that had surpassed Mr. Wang's in both look and taste. They are. Imperial Princess Liao was just an 11-year-old child after all. She replied truthfully, as unwilling as she was. Wei Fengzi smiled and turned to Madame Huang. Chulian took a second look at Wei Fengzi. Although she had only said 2 sentences, that was enough to extract Imperial Princess Liao out from the whole awkward fiasco. She was trying to show that Imperial Princess Liao was just a 11-year-old girl, despite her unruly behavior at the start. Now that she had admitted that Chu Lian's peach buns were delicious, her image had turned into an obedient child who knew how to change for the better. The arrogantly willful image of her from before would then fade away. Now that the situation was like this, the greatest blame now lied with Madame Huang. Chu Lian had to admit that Wei Fengzi was crafty. Those two sentences had fulfilled her promise to Madame Zhou to take care of Chu Lian, and they had protected the princess image. It wasn't easy to please everyone, but Wei Fengzi had succeeded. However, Chu Lian didn't take any of it to heart. Chapter 91. Jackpot 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Since Wei Fengzi had spoken, Madame Huang couldn't do anything but admit to her defeat. Furthermore, everyone had agreed on the taste of the longevity peach buns, so how could she go back on her word? I didn't expect House Jing'an's third young madam to have such talent at all. We've expanded our horizons today. After saying so, Madame Huang sent her personal maidservant to bring the tray of accessories to Chu Lian. However, only she herself knew how conflicted she felt inside. That pearl bracelet was her favorite accessory. When the maidservant held up the tray, Madame Huang narrowed her eyes purposefully at Chu Lian. That look was a warning, loud and clear, telling her not to accept those accessories. However, the young madam standing in the middle of the crowd had her head lowered, revealing her smooth forehead and her exquisitely fair nape. She reached out with her slender fingers and received the silver tray. She didn't lift her head at all from start to finish. No one could tell if she simply couldn't feel Madame Huang's threatening gaze, or if she really hadn't noticed it at all. Madame Huang wrung the handkerchief in her hands. She would have never expected Chu Lian to win the bet. Imperial Princess Liao couldn't bear to part with her golden Qilin statue. She wanted to ask for it back, but Wei Fengzi stopped her. When Lady Yang saw how frustrated Madame Huang was at losing, she felt extremely happy. What's wrong? Are you hurting for that pearl bracelet of yours, Madame Huang? Madame Huang was so annoyed she almost spat up blood. Although she really couldn't bear to give up the bracelet, she had to pretend to be magnanimous on the surface. What are you saying, Lady Yang? It's just a bracelet after all. Didn't you put in a coral bracelet yourself? Lady Yang's eyes were crinkled up in a smile. She would give up any number of coral bracelets just to see Madame Huang eat her words like this. Chu Lian gently smiled after receiving the silver tray and curtsied to each person in turn. Many thanks to Imperial Princess Liao, Royal Princess Duanjia, Madame Huang, Lady Yang, and noble madams for your gracious gifts. Haha, she had struck gold this time. When she looked up slightly and caught sight of the madam's unwilling expressions, the smile on Chu Lian's face grew a little more pronounced. She wasn't the one who started the bet. They were the ones who offered up their treasures to her. Not accepting them would be silly. If detect device equals desktop Google Tag. Command push function Google Tag. Display DIVGPT Advent. The crowd watched as House Jing'an's third young madam smiled with her eyes twinkling before she passed the whole tray to her maidservant for keeping. The madams felt a pang of loss and were envious to the point of bleeding. Even though Chu Lian had taken the entire tray of prizes without any pretense at modesty, no one thought her greedy. Some madams even thought that she was being genuine. The moment Chu Lian looked up, her eyes met with Royal Princess Duanjia's gaze. Very strangely, Royal Princess Duanjia even smiled at her. A maidservant dressed in green came rushing in from outside May Court. When she reached Madame Huang, she bobbed in courtesy before asking after the longevity peaches. When Lady Yang heard so, she laughed and pointed at the remaining plate of longevity peach buns on the stone table. Those are the longevity peaches that your Madame Huang has prepared. Bring them over. The maidservant looked at Madame Huang in surprise. Madame Huang just felt terrible after the whole ruckus, so she simply waved and let the maidservant take the peach buns off to the banquet at the outer court. The servant dressed in green walked over to the stone table. The moment she saw the realistic-looking peach buns, her eyes almost fell out from her staring. She quickly recovered her senses and carefully placed the plate into a box before leaving in a hurry. Now that the entire farce was finally over, The madams present all heaved a sigh of relief. They also got an interesting story to recount to their family once they got back. Chu Lian bobbed in a junior's greeting to Lady Yang before leading her maidservants out of the crowd and to somewhere less populated. When Madame Rong saw that Chu Lian had come out of the crowd, she brought Miss Su and Miss Yuan over to welcome her. Chu Lian frowned and bobbed in greeting to Madame Rong. Eldest sister-in-law. Madame Rong held on to Chu Lian's hand and, voice full of concern, said, "I'm glad you're all right, Miss Lian. You've frightened eldest sister-in-law to death." Chu Lian gently extracted her hand out from Madame Rong's grip. "Thank you for your concern, eldest sister-in-law." After saying so, she spotted Madame Zhou rushing over with her servants in tow. Upon catching sight of Chu Lian, Madame Zhou strode over quickly. Miss Yuan's eyes remained on the wooden box in Shi Yin's hands, greed shimmering in their depths. She tried to speak up, but was interrupted by Chu Lian. "Madame Jing'an has come to look for me. Eldest sister-in-law, why don't you bring fifth sister and eighth sister around a while longer?" With that, she curtsied to Madame Rong and went off to Madame Zhou. Madame Rong watched Chu Lian's slender back as she left, the light in her eyes darkening. It looked like Miss Lian blamed her after all. On the other side of the pond, Heir Zhenghua was laughing with praise. "Huh, is that true? House Jing'an's third young madam actually made longevity peach buns that are better than Mr. Wang's?" "Heir Zhenghua, it's true. I heard that those buns looked exactly like fresh peaches and even had the faint aroma of fresh fruit. After pinching them open, they even had some filling in them. There's something that no one has ever heard or seen before." Heir Zhenghua had tasted Chu Lian's water-drop matchas before. Upon hearing the manservant's description, he was almost drooling. "Are they really that good?" Heir Zhenghua asked doubtfully. The manservant chuckled. This servant heard from the maidservants in May Court. They didn't get to see them personally, but Lady Yang ate 3 of them in one go. They must surely be delicious. Chapter 92. Secret Affair 1. Heir Zhenghua pulled Xiao Bojian over with one arm and smiled. "Senior Xiao, I didn't think that House Jing'an's third young madam was so talented." Xiao Bojian finally loosened the tight grip he had on the railing. The frost in his eyes also slowly faded away. His gaze scanned the area across the pond as he pressed his lips together without saying a word. The manservant could hear the happiness in Heir Zhenghua's voice, so he quickly continued his report. "Heir Zhenghua, this servant heard that the longevity peach buns third young madam made are to be sent to the feast located in the outer court. If Heir Zhenghua wishes to taste them, why not go to the banquet hall? The feast is about to start." "All right, thanks for the news." Heir Zhenghua casually tossed out a peanut made of gold. The manservant hurriedly received it and profusely thanked the young master before leaving. As Heir Zhenghua fanned himself, he exclaimed, "Senior Xiao, let's go. We have to rush over there, or there won't be any left for us." Xiao Bojian went along with Heir Zhenghua silently. At around the same time, the prince sitting on the 3rd floor of Qingfeng Court also stood up. The corners of his lips curled. "Let's go. To the outer court." Although the Great Wu dynasty was more open-minded compared to the previous dynasties, they still separated males and females whenever possible. Thus, the 2 genders were seated in different halls. Chu Lian followed behind Madame Zhou obediently. Anyone looking at her now wouldn't think that she was the same third young madam who had just turned the tables on a bunch of noble madams in May Court. Madame Zhou's brows were slightly drawn together. By the time she had heard of Chu Lian's troubles and rushed back to May Court, she had already realized that someone was out to get Chu Lian. While House Dingyuan was prospering both in numbers and wealth and seemed like a mighty noble house, the truth of the matter was that the main branch and second branch were fighting each other. Madame Zhou was a young lady from the second branch and was also the eldest granddaughter of the family. Her aunt didn't like her at all and didn't have to worry about offending House Jing'an either. There was no limit to what her aunt could do. Madame Zhou had been informed upon reaching May Court that her youngest daughter had accidentally fallen off a decorative mountain and had been hurt. She had rushed over like someone had set her on fire, only to find that her daughter had only scraped her knee. By then, she had begun to feel like something wasn't quite right. However, she hadn't expected that her aunt's real target was Chu Lian. Madame Zhou inwardly sighed and turned to Chu Lian. "Third sister-in-law, It's eldest sister-in-law's fault for not taking care of you properly and letting you suffer. Just stick to me for now. Chu Lian shook her head and smiled. It's not eldest sister-in-law's fault. Even if they didn't get me this time, they have 1,001 other tricks they could use on me unless I never step out of the house again. I'm bound to fall for one of them. Don't take it to heart. I even earned quite a few good accessories today. When Chu Lian spoke of the accessories, her almond-shaped eyes lit up, clearly showing how happy she was. She really hadn't let any of what just happened affect her at all. Madame Zhou wanted to say something, but she stopped just as she was about to speak. Thinking of the shock Chu Lian must have suffered just now, she decided to save the rest of her words for when they got back to the Jinggan estate. It wasn't really a good thing to take the accessories from those noble madams and princesses. Madame Zhou patted Chu Lian's hand and led her to the courtyard where the female guests would be participating in the banquet. In her heart, she decided to return home quickly once the banquet ended so that they could avoid any other traps set by her aunt, Madame Huang. In the end, everything went smoothly, and the guests were invited to take a walk to Dingbo Pavilion after the feast. Chu Lian excused herself and rested in a guest room with her two nieces for a couple hours. Madame Zhou wanted to leave as early as possible, and Chu Lian didn't want to continue staying at the Dingyuan estate, so before dusk, they sent someone to summon House Jinggan's carriage. Chapter 93. Secret Affair 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Wenqing was led to Shi Court by one of the Dingyuan estate's maidservants. Just as they turned around a corner and entered a secluded area, the maidservant suddenly turned around and took out a letter from her sleeves, shoving it into Wenqing's hands. Wenqing froze in response, but heard the maidservant explain. This is a letter from Mr. Xiao to 6th Miss Chu. Sister, please be discreet. Following that, the maidservant ran off. Wenqing's entire body had stiffened. For 6th Miss Chu? Wasn't that their third young madam? Who was Mr. Xiao? When she finally recovered her senses, she quickly hid the letter in her sleeves. After looking left and right to make sure there was no one else around, she heaved a heavy sigh of relief. Shi Court was right around the corner. Wenqing made it there in 2 or 3 paces. She closed the door behind her and finally dared to take the letter out from her sleeve. There was the Chinese character for Xiao on the simple envelope, handwritten in a way that divulged the writer's strong personality. When Wenqing recalled the reminders that senior servant Zhong had given her yesterday, her heart beat like a drum. However, the way Chu Lian looked while making desserts and the way she amiably mingled with the maidservants also popped into her mind. A glint of determination flashed in Wenqing's eyes. She looked down at the letter in her hands. This must be from someone trying to frame third young madam. Third young madam was such a good person. How could she possibly be having a secret affair? Senior servant Zhong was too narrow-minded. She had to hide this letter. It was pitiful enough that third young master had left third young madam all by herself to go to the northern border. She had to protect third young madam. She couldn't let anyone harm her. After making her decision, Wenqing folded the letter and placed it back into her sleeve. By the time she returned to Chu Lian's side, Madame Zhou was already preparing to leave the Dingyuan estate. Wenqing followed behind Chu Lian, her head lowered and her expression tense. Chu Lian found it strange and turned to look at her, asking worriedly, Wenqing, are you feeling all right? When Wenqing looked up to meet third young madam's concerned gaze, her heart softened, and she was even more sure that the letter she had received was from someone trying to frame third young madam. Wenqing hurriedly shook her head. Third young madam, this servant is fine. It's been a little too hot these few days. Perhaps this servant looks off due to the heat. When we return to the estate, go back to your room and take a break. You don't have to serve by my side for now. Thank you, third young madam. Madame Zhou and Chu Lian left the Dingyuan estate. When they reached the Jing'an estate, it wasn't even dark yet. Old matriarch he had stayed behind in the Dingyuan estate for the night banquet. She would probably return late at night. Chu Lian sent Wenqing back to her room to rest the moment they returned to Songtao Court. If detect device equals desktop Google Tag. Command push function Google Tag. Display DIVGPT advn in the guest room provided for male guests in the Dingyuan estate. Xiao Bojian was seated on a wooden chair. Within minutes, a knock sounded at the door. After his grunt of approval, a woman dressed up as a normal maidservant pushed the door open and entered. The maidservant closed the door carefully and knelt down before Xiao Bojian.
Master,
Have you carried out your task? Master, please rest easy. The letter was given to one of 6th Miss Chu's personal maidservants. 6th Miss Chu must have read Master's letter by now. All right, return to hiding. Don't expose yourself. Understood. The maidservant opened the door and left. Right after passing through the doorway of the guest room, the cold expression on her face changed into one that was timid and weak. It was as if she were two different people. After the maidservant left, another person appeared within the guest room. This man was dressed in ash-gray clothing. He had an average figure and average looks. He bowed his head and lowered his voice as he said, "Master, isn't it a waste to expose 7 just for a woman?" The contented expression on Xiao Bojian's face instantly turned icy and hard. He narrowed his eyes and turned to look at the man behind him. "1. It's not your place to comment on what I do." The man called 1 stiffened and quickly lowered his head even further. "This subordinate has overstepped his bounds." Xiao Bojian waved his hand and continued to coldly order, "Don't come out again unless I call for you." TL note, Xiao Bojian has a group of secret guards who are literally named with numbers. 7 equals 7, but one's name in Chinese is a little more like first and first, second, third. My editor and I went through several different names, but having one of them be 7 and the other one be first seemed a little strange, so I kept it simple by translating his name as 1. Chapter 94, Secret Affair, 3. This chapter has been stolen from Valera Novels. Please read from the original source. Wenqing returned to her own room, a little flustered. She shut the door the moment she entered and took out the letter, placing it on the table. She didn't dare to read it herself. Rather, she wanted to use a fire starter to burn it to ashes. Just as she stood up, someone knocked on the door, scaring Wenqing into dropping the fire starter. In her panic, she hid the letter under a book. "Sister Wenqing, 3rd young madam asked you to go to the kitchen and have some warm soup before you sleep." It was the voice of the little girl who was in charge of sweeping the courtyard. Wenqing didn't dare to tarry and quickly went out. Right after she had left, Fuyin came out from the room next door. As she watched Wenqing's disappearing back, she snorted in disdain. She wasn't on duty today, and Chulian had gone off to attend the feast at the Dingyuan estate. Since she had been feeling sore and tender all over from her monthlies, she had gone back to her room to rest after reporting to senior servant Gue. However, right after coming out of her room, she had heard the lower-tier servants discussing how 3rd young madam had returned, and how she seemed to have brought some treasures back from the Dingyuan estate. Following that, she had heard sounds from the room next door and realized that Wenqing had returned to her room. Wenqing had only come to Songtao Court after 3rd young master had left, and had only been serving here for a few days. Fuyin, on the other hand, had been 3rd young madam's personal maidservant since she was still an unmarried young girl. She should have been the one involved in whatever fortune 3rd young madam had run into at the Dingyuan estate. Unfortunately, Wenqing's arrival had snatched her position away. Fuyin wasn't satisfied. 3rd young madam had become much more friendly after getting married. She would even bestow rewards or delicacies on her personal maidservants from time to time. Since Wenqing had followed Chulian to the Dingyuan estate today, and 3rd young madam had gotten something good, Wenqing couldn't possibly have returned empty-handed. Fuyin couldn't help but feel jealous. That reward should have been hers. However, it had gone to Wenqing instead. The personal maidservants all lived in a small courtyard next to Songtao Court, 2 to a room. Since Chulian had just returned, the others had all gone to serve her. Only Fuyin was left in the courtyard. Fuyin glanced at Wenqing's room, where the doors had been left half open due to her hurried departure. She suddenly turned and entered Wenqing's room. Since Wenqing and Wanlan had just moved there, the simple room was rather empty. She could see everything at one glance. Fuyin nervously gulped and started rummaging around the desk. There were the usual classics on the table: lessons for women, book of songs, etc. Next to them were the essential tools for writing. Fuyin suddenly spotted a yellow corner of paper sticking out of a book. She pulled it out and found a letter. There was only a single shao written on the envelope. If detect device equals desktop Google Tag. Command push function Google Tag. Display DIVGPT advn. Fuyan's eyes darted about in thought. She was about to put it back when she heard voices outside the room. She stuffed the letter into her arms in fright and quickly shut the door and left. When she returned to her own room and heard the sounds of the door opening and closing from next door, she collapsed on the ground. After getting her breath back, Fuyan remembered the letter she had taken. She quickly got up and locked the door before sitting by the bed and taking out the wrinkled envelope. She opened it slowly. She was so nervous that her hands were trembling, but the thrill of peeking into someone else's secret excited her. When she opened the letter fully and read the contents, Fuyan froze. This letter was meant for third young madam. It was Mr. Shao who had written it, intending it for third young madam, and he wanted to meet her at Defeng Tea House on the 26th. Fuyan was Chu Lian's personal maidservant, so she naturally knew of the goings-on between the two back in the Ingwer estate. However, she hadn't thought that Chu Lian would dare to continue having an affair with Mr. Shao even after marrying into House Jing'an. In her panic, Fuyan didn't know what to do. She didn't dare to enter Wenqing's room again, so she could only hide the letter in the bottom of her storage chest for now. Chapter 95, Distributing the Spoils, 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Xiao Bojian had assumed that Chu Lian's personal maidservants were all on his side. Since the letter had been received by one of her handmaidens, he assumed the letter would definitely reach Chu Lian's hands. When Wenqing returned and found that the letter had disappeared, she was scared out of her wits. She rummaged through the entire room, but couldn't find it. After her bout of panic, she eventually fell sick and couldn't get out of bed for a few days. While recovering from her illness, Wenqing could only console herself by thinking that she must have accidentally dropped it somewhere. Even if she had dropped it within Songtao Court, only Chu Lian's personal maidservants knew how to read. Since the incident had already happened, Wenqing didn't dare to report it to Wanlan or senior servant Zhong, and simply let it pass. Once Chu Lian had returned to her bedroom in Songtao Court, she ordered Xian to bring out the box of accessories. The moment the pear blossom wood box was opened, the dazzling glow of treasure inside was revealed. Senior servant Gu A, senior servant Zhong, Wenqing, and the rest who hadn't gone to the Dingyuan estate were blinded by the sight. What? Had third young madam gone shopping at a jeweler's store instead of attending old Marquis Dingyuan's longevity feast today? When Chu Lian looked up and noticed the shock on everyone's faces, she smiled mischievously. She took out Imperial Princess Liao's gracious contribution to the pot, the exquisite little golden Qilin statue, and showed it off to them. What do you think? Isn't it pretty? How could it possibly not be pretty? That was something that the Empress had ordered a special craftsman's guild to make by hand. Senior servant Gue and senior servant Zhong nodded in a daze. It was senior servant Gue who recovered first. Third young madam, where did you get all this jewelry from? Those couldn't possibly be visiting gifts from the Dingyuan estate. If the Dingyuan estate gave away things like that to their visitors, their doorstep would have been flattened by the crowds flocking there. Chu Lian shook the box of accessories while grinning from ear to ear. These were all top-quality goods, except for a few more normal-looking golden hairpins and bangles. However, even if their quality was just average, they were still worth a hefty sum. The best items of the lot were Lady Yang's red coral bracelet, Madame Huang's pink pearl bracelet, Royal Princess Duanjia's white jade ring, and Imperial Princess Liao's golden Qilin statue. Chu Lian shot a look at Xian before looking down into the box and picking out accessories to play with. Xian understood Chu Lian's hint and explained everything that had happened at the Dingyuan estate to the rest. Senior servants Gue and Zhong were shocked. They hadn't expected third young madam to run headfirst into a plot like that just by visiting the Dingyuan estate. However, after they had recovered from their fright, admiration blossomed in their hearts for their young madam. There must have been plenty of high-ranking officials' wives at the feast. Chu Lian was only 15 years old, yet she had managed to deal with the situation with calm and poise. It must have been tough on her. Senior servant Gue frowned upon looking at the various expensive accessories placed on the table. When she thought about the noble madams whom the accessories belonged to, she couldn't help but break out into cold sweat. Turning to look at her young madam, she saw that Chu Lien was happily playing with her spoils of war without a care. Senior servant Gue started worrying about her naivete. If detect device equals desktop, Google Tag. Command push, function, Google Tag. Display, DIVGPT advn. Wasn't her master a little too innocent? Senior servant Gue didn't want to speak of it in front of senior servant Zhou. She wanted to wait until everyone had been dismissed before reminding Chu Lien of the consequences of taking things from those high-ranking noble madams. However, she didn't expect Chu Lien to pass 2 sets of solid golden hairpins and bangles to her. Momo, take these and melt them into gold, then change them into banknotes. Senior servant Gue couldn't decide whether to receive the accessories or not. Instead, she decided to tactfully remind her of their origin. Third young madam, these accessories belong to those noble madams. It wouldn't be too good if she took other people's precious jewelry to melt, right? They're all mine now. Momo, don't worry about it. I know what I'm doing. Take them. Right, remember that list I gave you the other time? Follow the instructions there, and have the items made before you bring them back. Since Chu Lien had already spoken, senior servant Gue could only accept the accessories. Although senior servant Zhong didn't say a word, she made a mental note to question Wenqing thoroughly later on. Chapter 96. Distributing the Spoils. 2. Chu Lien had her dinner at Songtao Court before going to the study alone. She was practicing her writing again when Jingyan came in to report that an invitation had come from Qingxi Hall. Senior servant Gue helped Chu Lien change into a new set of clothes before worriedly asking her, "Third young madam, could the matriarch be calling you over to talk about what happened at the Dingyuan estate today?" Chu Lien looked at senior servant Gue with wide, clear eyes. "Momo, what are you scared of? I didn't do anything wrong. Even if grandmother has called me over to talk about it, you don't have to worry at all." Senior servant Gue pressed her lips together without speaking. How could she not worry for Chu Lien? The people at the banquet were either members of the imperial family or high-ranking noble wives. Madame Huang, Lady Yang, Imperial Princess Liao, Royal Princess Duanjia. They couldn't afford to offend any one of them. Perhaps due to living in the modern world for over 20 years, Chu Lien didn't really notice differences in status or seniority when interacting with others. That was also one of the reasons why she had been able to face so many high-ranking noble madams at Mei Court without batting an eyelash. Even if the current emperor of the Great Wu dynasty stood before her right now, she would most likely only bow her head in respect and perform a normal greeting without any fear or reverence. Senior servant Gui's light sigh was full of worry. She sent Chu Lien off to the entrance of Songtao Court and watched as her young madam's silhouette disappeared into the dark night. When Chu Lien reached Qingxi Hall, she saw that the matriarch had already changed into a more casual outfit for home, a dress embroidered with cranes. Matriarch, he was seated on a sofa and having a cup of tea. Chu Lien performed the usual greeting for seniors. She was then called to matriarch, his side with a smile. "Sanlang's wife, come, sit here." Chu Lien obediently sat next to matriarch he. Matriarch he brought out a fine yellow peachwood box and pushed it to Chu Lien. "Sanlang's wife, open it and take a look." Chu Lien tilted her head sideways and looked at matriarch he with a puzzled expression. The warm light of the lamps complemented Chu Lien's clear, spirited eyes. Since she was still young, there was a tenderness to her looks that spoke of her youth. Her appearance could easily invoke affection in the hearts of elders. While looking at Chu Lien's lovable, naive expression, matriarch he found that she was liking this granddaughter-in-law of hers more and more each day. Chu Lien opened the box, only to see a set of finely made tableware decorated with patterns for longevity. A small bowl, ivory chopsticks, a gold-lined porcelain spoon, and a jade chopstick rest. She held up this set of tableware and turned to matriarch he, still a little bewildered. Matriarch he chuckled. "This is a reward from old Marquis Dingyuan." Chu Lien recalled the longevity peach buns that had been served at the banquet in the outer court earlier and immediately understood. Could it possibly be because of those longevity peach buns? Matriarch, he nodded with a smile. You silly girl. When did you learn how to make longevity peach buns? Why didn't you make some for grandmother to have a taste earlier? Back at the Dingyuan estate, Matriarch, he had been drinking tea in one of the courtyards, completely unaware of the events that had taken place at May Court. She had been chatting with a group of older madams when suddenly, one of old Marquis Dingyuan's closest manservants had sent this wooden box over. It was only after she had asked the servant that she found out about Chu Lian's contribution to the feast, a plate of longevity peach buns that had been highly praised. Various thoughts had run through Matriarchy's head at the time, but none of them had showed on her face. She accepted the gift, gave her thanks, and graciously accepted the praises from the other old madams. It was only later on that she had heard the details from a servant sent by Madame Zhou. If grandmother wishes to eat some, we'll make them tomorrow, Chu Lian hurriedly offered. Good, good. Then grandmother will be waiting for your longevity peach buns tomorrow. Chapter 97. Distributing the Spoils, 3. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Chu Lian put the lid back on the wooden box and placed it to one side. Are there any other matters, grandmother? If the matriarch had only wanted to pass the gift to her, she could have waited until the next day, when she gave her morning greetings. Since she had called her to Qingxi Hall alone, matriarch, he must have something to say to her alone. As expected, matriarch, he happily continued speaking. Sanlang's wife, I've heard about what happened today. It must have been tough on you. Luckily, our Liener is smart enough to outmaneuver any trickery. Grandmother heard that you've gotten quite a few accessories from those madams. What are you planning to do with them? The old matriarch watched Chu Lian's expression as she waited for her reply. Chu Lian stared back at matriarch he with wide eyes, appearing as if she was confused. Inwardly, she smiled. Matriarch, he was trying to test her. Chu Lian already had a plan for her spoils. Grandmother, I couldn't have gotten these accessories without Lady Yang's help, so I can't just take their accessories. Granddaughter-in-law will write letters and prepare gifts in return tomorrow. Then I'll instruct some servants to send the accessories and gifts back. The slightly imposing expression on matriarch, his face softened into kindness in an instant. Chu Lian continued, adding, as for the others, I won them fair and square, so they're mine. Well, Imperial Princess Liao might come asking for her golden Qilin statue back. As for Madame Huang's precious pearl bracelet, I'll help to safeguard her treasure. She doesn't like me anyway, so I don't want to give it back to her. Uffed. Matriarch, he couldn't hold back her laughter. Chu Lian's somewhat childish tone made her want to pamper her even more. Although she had spoken in a childish manner, there was nothing wrong with the way she had chosen to take care of things. She had heard that most of the accessories were top-quality treasures, and very few girls would bear to send them back again once they had them, especially someone without many accessories herself, like Chu Lian. It was good that Sanlang's wife hadn't been blinded by greed and had chosen the right way to handle those prizes of hers. Although she had been a little juvenile on some of the finer details, Chu Lian had a good grasp on how to please everyone involved overall. She had called Chu Lian over to knock some extra sense into her and make her more aware of the intricacies behind such dealings. But she hadn't expected that Chu Lian had already properly planned everything out. Matriarch, he felt even more gratified that she had such a good granddaughter-in-law, but at the same time, she felt even guiltier about Chu Lian's situation. That heartless brat Sanlang had abandoned such a wonderful wife. What a waste. Matriarch, he knew about the conditions that Chu Lian had grown up in back at the Ingwer estate, more or less. She wanted to wait and observe for a while longer, but after He Changdi's sudden departure and the events at the Dingyuan estate today, Matriarch, he felt that there was a need to push forward her plans. Sanlang's wife, it's getting late. Why don't you return to your courtyard and rest a little earlier? Tomorrow, come over to grandmother's place a little earlier. Grandmother has something else to say to you. If detect device equals desktop, Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, DIVGPT advent. Understood. Chu Lian agreed and bowed to Matriarch he before leaving Qingxi Hall. The next day, Chu Lian made her way to Qingxi Hall early in the morning for her daily greetings. Matriarch, he had also gotten up earlier, seemingly on purpose. When Chu Lian arrived, the matriarch was already sipping some tea in the parlor. Chu Lian shot a glance at the sancha on the table and frowned a little. At the matriarch's advanced age, it wasn't good for her to drink tea that contained such a strange mix of spices. When matriarch saw that she had arrived, she waved her hand to indicate that Chu Lian should take a seat by her side. Once Chu Lian had settled in, matriarch passed a thin account book to her. Sanlang's wife, open it and take a look. Chu Lian opened the account book curiously. Within moments, she understood what it was. This was an account book for a restaurant. Gillen Restaurant was written in tidy lettering on the first page. Grandmother, this is an account book for Gillen Restaurant? Matriarch smiled as she nodded. Gillen Restaurant was part of her dowry. It had already been in business for more than 50 years by now, and it could be considered one of the capital's long-established shops. Chapter 99. Restaurant 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. The two of them were getting along well when senior servant Liu came in with a smile, reporting that eldest young madam had brought the two young ladies over with her. Chu Lian looked at the account book before looking up at matriarch again, her eyes shining with expectation. Matriarch smiled. You silly child. All right, I'll inform your sister-in-law myself when she comes in. After getting the matriarch's reassurance, Chu Lian stopped worrying. She couldn't tell what Madame Zhou would think about this, since the novel hadn't mentioned much of her personality. However, she was Wei Fengzi's close friend after all, and Wei Fengzi was someone to watch out for. In the novel, Madame Zhou had gotten seriously injured from Chu Lian's ploy early on. She couldn't even get out of bed. However, now Madame Zhou was perfectly healthy and managing the entire estate. They were wives of different branches of the family, and their interests weren't in conflict. But no matter what kind of personality Madame Zhou had, Chu Lian didn't want matriarch's gift to give rise to any resentment between them and affect the peace they had now. Her husband wasn't by her side to shelter her, and she didn't want to create an enemy for herself within the estate. That would just make her days harder for herself. As expected, when Madame Zhou entered Qingxi Hall and heard that Chu Lian had already been there for some time, her eyebrows knitted together. She brought her daughters into the parlor with a smooth expression. When Madame Zhou performed her greetings, Chu Lian stood up and returned it. Following that, matriarch started to explain how Chu Lian would be taking over the management of Gillen Restaurant. The slight tension in Madame Zhou's heart went away upon hearing the matriarch explaining everything to her so clearly. She knew a little about the private properties that the matriarch held. The most profitable one was a sancha shop. Its monthly earnings were roughly 200 to 300 taels. The worst property was Gillen Restaurant. It had been a losing business for years. Madame Zhou still couldn't understand why matriarch kept it with her, even though it wasn't earning money at all. She could have sold it off to buy another store in a more bustling location. It was just a restaurant in the red, and matriarch had explained it to her straight away. So Madame Zhou didn't mind that only Chu Lian was given a property. Her impression of Chu Lian also improved by a lot. Dalong's wife, you've managed the estate for so many years, and you've done well in managing the businesses in your hands. When you're free, do give a few pointers to Sanlang's wife. Madame Zhou gave a genuine smile this time. If third sister-in-law doesn't mind, then come to my courtyard at any time. Then I'll have to thank eldest sister-in-law in advance. Matriarch's heart was soothed as she watched her granddaughters-in-law interacting peacefully. Her gaze fell upon her great-granddaughters, and she opened her arms wide. Little Lin, come over to great-grandmother's side and let great-grandmother have a look at you too. If detect device equals desktop, Google Tag. Command push, function, Google Tag. Display, DIVGPT advian. Matriarch tenderly stroked their heads. However, seeing them, she did have some regrets. Little Lin was already 6, but there were no great-grandsons for her to pamper yet. As she thought so, her eyes turned to Chu Lian's flat belly. Ever since her arrival to the Great Wu dynasty, Chu Lian had become rather sensitive towards other people's gazes and the meanings hidden inside them. When she noticed the matriarch eyeing her belly, she stiffened and her mood worsened. She had forgotten that she had submitted that blood-stained white handkerchief to matriarch's servants. In matriarchy's eyes, she and he Sanlang had already consummated their marriage on their wedding night. Furthermore, the Chu family's missus had the reputation of being particularly fertile. Perhaps matriarchy thought that she had hit the bullseye with one shot. Chu Lian's mouth twitched in her embarrassment. She was still a virgin, so it was impossible for her to be pregnant. It would be scarier if she actually got pregnant in this condition. TL note: if you like Chu Lian's funny and silly inner thoughts, try reading this. MC is kick-ass. The female lead is literally named Nutjob, and the story starts out with her accidentally making the ugliest game character in history. Of course, she has the funniest lines in her thoughts too. 3. Chapter 100, Restaurant 3. This chapter has been stolen from Volaire novels. Please read from the original source. Taking the account book along, she followed Madame Zhou to visit Countess Jing'an for about 10 minutes before returning to her Songtao court. She had plenty to do today. First, she had to make some snacks as return gifts for Lady Yang and the other ladies. She also had to find the time to practice her handwriting. She had to start managing a whole restaurant soon, so she definitely had to make sure she could read traditional Chinese words. In the remaining time, she also had to look through Gillen Restaurant's account book. After reaching Songtao Court, she stored the account book in a safe place before bringing Shi Yin and Jing Yan with her to the kitchen. The ingredients for longevity peach buns were easy enough to prepare. Chu Lian noted that there was still a good amount of red beans left. An idea sparked off in her mind, and she remembered the 8 confections, a set of desserts from Beijing. They were Beijing-style desserts that had endured through years of history and variations. Back in her previous life, when Chu Lian had gone to Beijing to play, she had learned it from an old granny staying in the same block of apartments. For the sake of learning how to make an authentic set of 8 confections, she had specially stayed there for half a month. There were different variations of 8 confections, namely the big, small, and fine variations. They were called the 8 confections because there were 8 desserts in total, each with a different filling and shape. This was one of the most complicated desserts Chu Lian had ever made. However, the ingredients for 8 confections were quite common. Even in the Great Wu Dynasty, she could still gather the 8 different kinds of filling. Chu Lian first taught Xian how to pound the red beans into paste. She then instructed Jingyan to wash the green plums and raisins, while she herself started making the dough. When the confections were done, Xian and Jingyan's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. Senior servant Gue was waiting in the corridor outside the kitchen. From her hands, Chu Lian took some oval-shaped decorated bamboo baskets that she had ordered to be prepared earlier. She walked to the table and smiled at Xian and Jingyan. "Watch carefully. I'll arrange the desserts once, and I'll leave the rest to you." Since she had to send gifts to quite a few houses this time, Chu Lian had made plenty of desserts. There were kidney-shaped ones, fist-shaped ones, and even bat-shaped ones. She carefully placed them one by one into the bamboo basket before adding a freshly plucked peony that was in the midst of blooming. She scattered a few drops of water on the flower petals before putting it in an empty space inside the basket. Thus, she finished arranging one set of 8 confections. The various flavors of desserts were arranged artfully in the exquisite little bamboo basket. They were already pretty by themselves, but since they all had crispy pastry skins made of flour, their colors looked a little uniform. Adding the vibrantly red peony made the arrangement of desserts a feast for the eyes. The basket of desserts carried an elegant, subtle fragrance of flowers, hooking the appetite of anyone who looked at it, especially in this particularly scorching hot summer. Jingyan's eyes were as wide as they could possibly be. She gulped and mumbled, Third, young madam, these are beautiful. This servant can't bear to eat these." Chu Lian smiled before glaring playfully at her. "Remember, arrange the rest of the baskets like this. There are still plenty remaining. When you're done, take some to try for yourselves too. If detect device equals desktop, Google Tag. Command push, function, Google Tag. Display, DIVGPT adv. When Xian and Jingyan heard that there was a share of desserts for them too, they grinned from ear to ear. The desserts meant as return gifts were sent to Chu Lian once they were arranged properly. Chu Lian then picked out suitable packaging for them, placing black velvet on the insides of the gift boxes. She then put in the bamboo baskets and closed the lid. After that, she brought out the accessories she was going to return and placed them into suitably sized wooden boxes, which were all handed to the steward. The steward sent out the more quick-witted manservants to each of the noble estates. They also passed on the message that there were desserts within the boxes that had to be eaten within the day. TL note. So here we have the 8 confections, aka Jingbiajian. There isn't really an English name for them, and even the Wikipedia article lists them as Jingbajian. The name literally means city's 8 items, with the Jing or city referring to Beijing. Here's an English article if you want to know more about them. http://www.chinascenic.com/magazine/the Jing, Beijing, traditional, edible, gifts of Beijing 214. HTML, by the way, we just hit chapter 100. So in true TMR fashion, let's celebrate with some delicious food pics. Love. 8 confections looks like what Chu Lian might have arranged inside the box. Chapter 101. A gift in return. After making the longevity peach buns, Chu Lian sent some over to each courtyard of the Jing'an estate, together with a set of 8 confections. It was still hot out, and Chu Lian had already eaten all these pastries before in her previous life, so she only had a few to satisfy her taste buds. On the other hand, the servants in Songtao Court were happily eating away while they admired the desserts. After tasting Chu Lian's desserts, the confections that the famous cook Zhou had made in the past were inedible in comparison. They had never thought that a small plate of desserts like this could have so many different forms and flavors. The stuffing in each one was different, and so were the shapes. There was even both sweet and salty flavors. Heavens, if Chu Lian hadn't actually made them, they wouldn't have believed that there could be such delicious desserts on Earth, even if you beat them to death. The 8 confections were even more shocking than the longevity peach buns. Fuyan's favorite was the one with red date stuffing. The outside was soft and crisp, while the inside was filled with a delicate fragrance, and there was even the aroma of red dates. She ate so much that her cheeks were bulging like a little squirrel hoarding its food. While distributing the confections, Xian smiled and placed the ones shaped like peach blossoms with the red date stuffing onto Fuyan's plate. Here, you greedy little cat. Although third young madam made a lot of these, there's just about enough for all of us to share. Here's an extra red date flavored one. If you like to eat them, why not ask third young madam for the recipe? Then you can make them on your own next time. Fuyan froze for a moment in the midst of chewing. She stared at Xian with wide eyes, who didn't notice the look as she was distributing the confections. This was how it had always been back at the Ingwer estate. Although she and Xian had both been assigned to serve third young madam on the same day, for some reason, third young madam liked Xian more and had always entrusted her with more tasks. Of course, she didn't like losing to Xian, but Xian often looked after her, giving her the first pick of any of the good food. They had eaten red dates together a while back, and Xian liked them too. But instead of keeping the red date-flavored pastries for herself, Xian gave them specially to her. Fuyan took a deep breath and looked down, trying to suppress the sour jealousy in her heart. She decided to hide the letter that Mr. Xiao had written to third young madam for the time being. She wouldn't give it to anyone, at least for now. Eating third young madam's great cooking every meal was pretty good anyway. Xian was unaware of the swirling thoughts in Fuyan's heart. She smiled as she placed a pomegranate-shaped pastry stuffed with a salty pepper paste onto Wenqing's plate. Wenqing hunkered down and ate her desserts in small, savoring bites, completely silent. These desserts suited her taste buds perfectly. She had never liked sweet things, but most of the confections in the capital were sweet. She had never eaten a salty confection that was pepper-flavored before. However, the more she enjoyed it, the more she thought of the incriminating letter she lost. It made her feel more and more uneasy by the second, causing the pastry to lose all its wonderful taste in her mouth. Meanwhile, in Countess Jing'an's courtyard, Miaozhen was serving the Countess a round, drum-shaped confection. Countess Jing'an hadn't eaten a proper meal for days, yet she actually managed to eat 3 pieces of the confections that Chu Lian had sent over. This made her handmaiden, Miaozhen, really happy. Madam, I wonder how third young madam comes up with these ideas. Perhaps due to finally having eaten some food, Countess Jing'an's pale and hollowed face was a little flushed. She waved her hand, indicating that she was full. That girl, she really shouldn't have gone to the trouble. I can't finish it all. Why don't you share the rest? If we leave it for too long, it'll be spoiled by tomorrow. I don't have much to reward her with by now. Miaojin wiped the corners of Countess Jing'an's mouth with a handkerchief. Madam, what are you saying? Third young madam did this out of filial piety, and not for a reward. Didn't you hear from third young madam that she received Gillen restaurant from the matriarch today? Madam, you were so good at managing businesses when you were younger. Why don't you give her a few pointers when she comes for her daily greetings tomorrow? TL note. In an author's note from the previous chapter, there were people complaining to the author that she wasn't updating frequently enough, so the author started posting 1K word chapters, like this one, to update more frequently lol. Chapter 102. Fighting for Peaches. 1. Countess Jing'an smiled and patted Miaojin's slender hand. You're the only one around here who I can count on to plan so perfectly. Miaojin, you're already 17 this year. Do you have any plans for the future? You can't possibly stay by my side forever. When she heard Countess Jing'an's words, Miaojin froze. She bit her lip and said, Madam, Miaojin wants to serve you forever. What nonsense. As a lady, you'll have to marry someday. How could you labor by my side for your whole life? If you really do that, wouldn't your mother be hurt? Miaojin was the daughter of Countess Jing'an's nursemaid. When she was 10, her mother sent her to serve at Countess Jing'an's side. Unfortunately, Countess Jing'an's nursemaid had passed away from sickness sometime in the past few years. Before she died, she had begged Countess Jing'an to look after Miaojin for her. Since Miaojin had always been smart and considerate, Countess Jing'an was happy to look after her. Miaojin's eyes immediately turned watery. She looked up and cast a shy glance at the Countess before mumbling quietly, Madam, Miaojin really doesn't have any requests at all. Miaojin would just like to marry someone in this estate, so Miaojin can continue to serve Madam even after marriage. Countess Jing'an stared at the girl she had watched grow up. As she thought, the images of suitable candidates popped up in her mind one after another, but in the end, she still crossed them all out. The main steward of the outer court had a second son that might be suitable, and that child was also pretty clever. Unfortunately, that second son already took a wife last year. Otherwise, it would have been good for Miaojin to become the wife of one of the estate's stewards. As she was distracted by her thoughts, a senior servant announced from outside that the heir of the family had arrived. Just as the voice of the announcer faded away, Heir Jing'an entered the room. Mother, how has your health been lately? The heir of House Jing'an, He Changqi, had the body of a martial artist. He also looked the most similar to Count Jing'an. Although he wasn't even 30 years old yet, his buff body, tan skin, and full beard made him look much older. He was as tall as He Changdi, but if they stood together, no one would be able to tell that they were brothers. Countess Jing'an hadn't expected Dalong to charge right in just like that. She rolled her eyes helplessly at him. How old are you by now? How is it that you haven't learned any manners? He Changqi wasn't bothered by his mother's complaint at all. He wasn't someone who was bothered by trifling details. At a young age, he had usually kept to his father's side as he learned martial arts, so he had never been very conscious of the rules that bound the womenfolk of the inner court. Besides, this was just his mother's room. He Changqi looked down and noticed a few leftover desserts on the table next to the bed. With a refreshing smile, he said, Mother, are the confections that third sister-in-law made to your liking? Countess Jing'an waved He Changqi over to sit by her bedside. Since the eldest young master had arrived, Miaojin didn't dare to dispense with etiquette. She kept her head lowered and was already standing respectfully next to Countess Jing'an. When He Changqi had entered, she had immediately bobbed in greeting. Countess Jing'an's gaze inadvertently passed over Miaojin, and she noticed that the little maidservant's face was flushed red. The countess was taken aback. She looked her eldest son up and down and found that the brat was standing with his back straight and hands behind his back, a broad smile on his face. They suit my tastes very well. Mother has never eaten such exquisite, interesting desserts before. After the 8 confections had been finished, Chu Lian had sent a set to each branch of the family. Since there were 2 children in Dalong's branch, she naturally sent a few more to his courtyard. Changchi had tried 2 of them and found them delicious. I didn't expect that third sister-in-law would have secret recipes with her. Mother, I'm sure you haven't heard this yet. At old Marquis Dingyuan's longevity feast, everyone was fighting over a small plate of longevity peach buns. Countess Jing'an was dumbfounded. What had happened? A bunch of noblemen had been fighting over longevity peach buns? Were those longevity peach buns possibly made by Chulian? Chapter 103, Fighting for Peaches 2. Chulian had reported the entire events of the Dingyuan estate to Countess Jing'an upon her return. Back then, the remaining longevity peach buns were sent to the banquet over at the outer court, and that was the last Chulian had seen of them. Since it was the male guests who had been the recipients, the female guests, who were in a completely different location, naturally had no idea what happened. Even the matriarch had only received the reward that old Marquis Dingyuan had bestowed on Chulian, and no other information. Countess Jing'an hadn't thought that something like that had happened at the male guest side of the feast. Changchi had purposely come over to make his mother happy, so of course, he narrated the entire course of events to her. It was a funny story and involved one of their family members, so he gave a lively description of the whole tale. Over on their side of the banquet, the feast hadn't been going on for long. The crowd was busy toasting the old white-haired marquis. It was at that moment that a maidservant brought in a plate of realistic longevity peach buns, saying that it was heir Dingyuan's wife, Madame Huang, who had sent them. After that announcement, everyone's eyes had been glued to the plate. The old marquis had been seated the closest to the peach buns. Although his sight was fading, his sense of smell was still as good as ever. Old Marquis Dingyuan sniffed and found that the peach buns actually carried the scent of fresh peaches. Finding it interesting, he immediately took one to have a taste and gave his grand approval after one bite. Since a man who had lived a long life had tasted and approved of the peach buns immediately became a lucky charm. It would be a good omen of fortune and prosperity for a young person if they managed to eat one. The feast-goers' curiosity was already piqued by the bun's appearance. No one could have predicted that heir Zhenghua, who was known for chasing after novel things, would stand up on the spot to congratulate the marquis before shamelessly asking for one of the longevity peach buns to eat. Old Marquis Dingyuan had laughed 3 times in amusement. Having a young man request for one of his longevity peach buns at his own longevity feast spoke of how esteemed he was in their eyes. He naturally agreed to the request. Heir Zhenghua didn't stand on ceremony at all. He took 2 buns at once, and after biting into one, his eyes completely lit up. Then, the usually tight-mouthed and silent Prince Jean actually spoke up to request a longevity peach bun from old Marquis Dingyuan too. He was even more shameless than heir Zhenghua and grabbed 3 buns at once. Heir Zhenghua was famous for being picky with his food, so it certainly said something when he made such an expression of enjoyment. Since he and Prince Jean had already paved the way for the rest, only adding to the crowd's curiosity, the plate of longevity peach buns had been completely swiped clean in a matter of minutes. 2 of the most influential and respected court officials were speechless upon beholding that scene. When had so many of their peers turned into foodies? How had they missed this? What were their spies doing? Hey, isn't that the prideful old censor who likes to impeach others for fun and turns all of his political comments into righteous preaching? Who knew that you were someone who would do anything for food? Do you still have any face left? What an eyesore. I hope you'll choke on those longevity peach buns. However, at the end of the day, the 2 court officials who couldn't put away their pride to snatch some of those longevity peach buns had stormy expressions on their faces. Changqi's vivid descriptions made Countess Jing'an break out into a wide smile. She couldn't resist smiling as she pretended to glare at her eldest son. Keep this kind of talk inside our estate. Don't speak of this outside, lest we draw trouble to ourselves. We can't afford to offend those great officials. Yes, Mother. I know. I'm just trying to make you laugh. All right, Mother understands. You still have some work to do after lunch, don't you? Head out soon. Don't waste your time here with Mother. Chapter 104, Fighting for Peaches 3. This chapter has been stolen from Bolaire novels. Please read from the original source. He Changchi noted that it was about time, so he stood up to take his leave. After moving just 2 steps away, Countess Jing'an instructed from behind him, "Come back a little earlier for tonight's dinner." Although the various branches of the Jing'an estate didn't usually take their meals together, they would eat dinner together in the middle and end of every month. Everyone would gather in Qingxi Hall and strengthen their family bonds. I understand. I won't be late for my meeting." Countess Jing'an noticed that Miaojin was still staring distractedly after her eldest son, long after he was gone. She inwardly sighed. 5 years ago, Miaojin had fallen into one of the ponds in the estate by accident, and the passing He Changchi had saved her. It was likely then that this girl had fallen in love with him. Unfortunately, the He family had that rule against taking concubines. However, Dalong had been married to Madame Zhou for quite a number of years, and they still didn't have any sons. Furthermore, Madame Zhou had suffered some complications after giving birth to little Lin. Little Lin was already 4 this year, but there was no news of another pregnancy from Dalong's wife. Dalong was about to hit the age when he would be allowed to take a concubine, since he had no sons. Countess Jing'an abruptly made a decision. She pulled Miaojin's hands into her own and smiled as she asked, "Miaojin, what do you think about the heir?" Miaojin hadn't expected Countess Jing'an's sudden question. Her face flushed red and her soul seemed to have flown to the far reaches of the earth in her panic. She quickly cast a sideways glance at the Countess, but she couldn't read the expression on Countess Jing'an's face at all. The redness on her face gave way to pallor, and she knelt to the ground with a thump. Trembling, she said, "This servant has such a lowly identity. This servant doesn't dare to have any thoughts of the heir." After she finished speaking, she placed her head on the footrest before the bed, shaking like a leaf in the wind. She didn't dare to say another word. As one of Countess Jing'an's handmaids, she knew the rules of the estate clearly. The men of the family were only allowed to take a concubine if they didn't have any male heirs when they reached the age of 30. Thus, she had quickly cut off her own desires for heir Jing'an. She would daydream of that unattainable man only when she was alone, but because she had gotten a little lost in her thoughts just now, the Countess had actually discovered that the object of her affections was eldest young master. Countess Jing'an was a little startled. It was only now that she realized her silly handmaid had misunderstood her intentions and thought that she was angry that Miaojin had stepped out of bounds for daring to long for her eldest son. Countess Jing'an sighed helplessly. She reached out to pull the trembling Miaojin up and glared at her. "You silly girl. How could I possibly think like that? All right, I'm not blaming you. Just tell me honestly, what do you think about Dalong?" Miaojin stared at Countess Jing'an in a daze. It took a long moment before she looked down with a flush that spread all the way to her neck. Heir Jing'an is tall and handsome. If detect device equals desktop, Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, DIVGPT advient. Countess Jing'an burst out into laughter. Tall and handsome? As his mother, she knew better than anyone what her eldest son was like. If Dalong's burnt skin and ruffian-like appearance could still be considered tall and handsome, then love really was blind. If Miaojin had used that description on Sanlang, she might have believed it. All right, I understand. Miaojin, don't worry about it and continue serving at my side for now. Upon hearing Countess Jing'an's words, Miaojin's heart almost leapt out of her throat. In the Yang estate, Lord Yang had just returned from Wenhua Hall. He had taken care of quite a few tricky tasks today, so he was more tired than usual and was even hungrier than he usually was. When Lord Yang reached the outer courts parlor, he just happened to see a steward carefully bringing in an exquisitely decorated box and paused in his steps. The steward saw that the master of the house had returned, so he quickly came over to greet his master. "What's this?" Lord Yang tilted his chin towards the box in the steward's hands. Replying to master, this was sent by someone from the Jing'an estate. They said that it's a return gift for the madam and that it's food, so we can't leave it for long. The Jing'an estate? Food? Could it be those longevity peach buns from Marquis Dingyuan's feast? While on the way back to their estate yesterday, Lord and Lady Yang had been talking about the interesting events behind Chu Lian making longevity peach buns. Lord Yang hadn't been able to set his pride aside to request for a bun, so they had been on his mind for a while. Chapter 105. The Power of Snacks. 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Lord Yang grew even grumpier when he thought of how even the shameless censor who had submitted a petition against him had gotten to eat a longevity peach bun, while on the other hand, he could only imagine what it might have tasted like. Nothing had gone his way today. Was it because he had skipped out on eating one of those lucky buns? Lord Yang coughed lightly and said, "Send them to the parlor. I'll bring them to the missus later when I visit her in the inner court." Lord Yang didn't like sancha either, so he had his manservant pour him a cup of warm water instead as he took a seat in the parlor to rest. When his line of sight fell upon the brocade box innocently positioned next to him, Lord Yang reached out and opened it. The vision inside made his half-shut eyes fly wide open. 8 pastries were arranged inside the small, exquisite green bamboo basket. They each had different shapes, and the blooming red peony nestled to the side made them extremely eye-catching. When Lord Yang breathed in, he could smell a faint fragrance of flowers mixed in with the buttery aroma of the pastries. Lord Yang couldn't resist. He gulped and picked up a bat-shaped pastry, looking it over curiously before he bit off a mouthful. There was even stuffing inside. Were those raisins? Refreshing, crisp, and sweet without being too greasy. Delicious. Lord Yang took out a second piece shaped like a peach. Oh, this one tasted like chestnuts. A novel, sweet taste, with the aroma of chestnuts lingering in the mouth long after the pastry was eaten. The third piece was shaped like a hand and had the aroma of roses. Despite eating so many already, he wasn't sick of them yet. This one had an elegant, light flavor, which was very much suited to his tastes. By the time Lord Yang came back to his senses, he found that there were only 2 pieces left in the entire box of confections. The hand he had extended towards the leftovers awkwardly retreated. The manservant next to him had been watching the whole time with his eyes twitching. Inwardly, he was thinking, "My lord, those were meant to be a return gift for the mistress. How could you eat so many of them, just like that? Bring these along. We're going to the inner court to visit your mistress." Lord Yang coughed to hide his embarrassment as he relayed his order to the manservant. On the way to the inner court, Lord Yang kept a constant inner monologue of complaints running. That Hausjingen was being way too petty. How could they send such a small box, only 8 pastries, as a return gift? There was only one of each flavor, too. So when he finished 1 pastry in 2 bites, that meant he couldn't have another of the same flavor. They arrived at the inner court's main courtyard to the sight of Lady Yang speaking to her daughter-in-law. Lady Yang turned her head and immediately spotted her husband. She stood up and welcomed him with a smile. "Dear, why are you back so early today?" she asked. When she noticed the brocade box that the manservant was carrying, the smile on her face grew even more pronounced. "Why, you even brought me a present today. If detectivice equals desktop, Google Tag. Command push, function, Google Tag. Display, DIVGPT advian. Lord Yang's face stiffened a little in his embarrassment. "This is a return gift from Hausjingen." The manservant set the brocade box on the table before retreating. Lady Yang raised an eyebrow in inquiry. Upon remembering the girl she had met at Marquis Dingyuan's longevity feast, she walked to the table without bothering to give a second thought about Lord Yang's expression. Hausjingen's return gift? What could it be? I'll have to show it to my daughter-in-law, too. Lady Yang's eldest daughter-in-law hadn't been able to make it to Marquis Dingyuan's longevity feast that day, so upon hearing her mother-in-law's words, she stepped forward. Lord Yang couldn't possibly stop her, so he pretended as if nothing was wrong and sat to one side. The moment Lady Yang opened the box, she was greeted with the 2 lonely pieces left in the strangely empty box. She turned to Lord Yang in surprise. I was a little hungry just now, so I ate 2 pieces, Lord Yang stiffly explained. There was such a huge empty space in the box. Are you sure you only ate 2 pieces? The corner of Lady Yang's mouth twitched. She closed the lid of the box. Chapter 106. The Power of Snacks. 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Her eldest daughter-in-law gaped a little when she saw the contents, or more specifically, the lack thereof. However, she still remembered to close her mouth to avoid making a faux pas in the midst of a delicate situation. Since father has returned, daughter-in-law will go to the main kitchen and instruct them to add more of father's favorite dishes. Lady Young only managed to restrain herself until her daughter-in-law left. Afterwards, she burst out laughing. Was this sent by House Jingant's third young madam? Lord Young nonchalantly nodded as he sipped his tea, keeping up his innocent pretense. I can't say I blame you. That girl makes the most delicious food. After saying so, Lady Young opened the box and picked up a pastry. The moment she tasted it, her eyes lit up. That girl. What did she make this time? It fits my tastes even better than those longevity peach buns she made before. It's actually salty. Lord Young licked his lips. A salty pastry? What a pity he hadn't been able to taste it. There were only 8 pastries in this box, so it seems like each one has a different flavor. Lady Young was surprised. There were such finely made desserts? She quickly ate the very last one and confirmed that the 2 pastries she had eaten had completely different tastes. It was only after she was done eating that she picked up the smaller box at the side. When she saw that her coral bracelet was inside, the corners of Lady Yang's lips curled up. It looks like there's more to this girl from House Ingwa than just being more fertile. They finally had someone who had brains amongst them. Lady Yang immediately wrote a reply and sent one of the Yang family's most trusted manservants to the Jing'an estate with the letter. Ever since Lord Yang had eaten the 8 confections that Chu Lian had sent over, he had fallen in love with rose-flavored desserts. He instructed the chefs in his estate to make some, but none of them could compare to the ones that Chu Lian had made that day, causing Lord Yang to become even pickier about his food. He even lost a few kilograms of weight after that. Of course, the birth of the gourmand Lord Yang was a later story. The same return gift had been sent to Prince Wei's estate. Royal Princess Duanjia opened up the brocade box without any hesitation. Her big eyes were shimmering when she saw the desserts within. In order to enjoy them all by herself, she carefully brought them back to her own courtyard. Not even her second brother received a single piece when he came over looking for snacks. Seeing his little sister acting like a puppy guarding her food, the royal prince was extremely amused. He immediately ran off to his mother's room to tattle on his sister. Mother, third sister found something really delicious, but she's so stingy she wouldn't let me have a single bite. Oh, has she? Princess Wei raised an eyebrow. Royal Princess Duanjia's personality was haughty and aloof, and it was rare to find something that could move her. Princess Wei found it interesting that something like food had managed to make her daughter act out of character. As mother and son were talking, Royal Princess Duanjia entered the room. Brother, how old are you? What are you doing snitching to mother about me at your age? The royal prince sat next to Princess Wei and retorted, I'm just trying to find out exactly what kind of food has bewitched my darling little sister. Royal Princess Duanjia glared at the royal prince and moved to Princess Wei's other side. Mother, in a few days, I want to invite someone to our estate. If detect device equals desktop, Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, DIVGPT advn. Princess Wei was sitting in the master's seat. Brimming with an aura of elegant luxury, a faint smile appeared on her lips. Is it the person who gave you those desserts? Royal Princess Duanjia smiled mysteriously. I'm not telling Mother yet. Mother will know when she comes. Princess Wei lovingly poked her only daughter's forehead. Mother won't stop you from making friends, but don't forget your status. Back in the Jing'an estate, the main steward in the outer court had already ordered a senior servant to bring over 2 letters to Songtao Court before dinner. One of the letters was even accompanied by a gift. Chu Lian received the letters and glanced at the contents within. One of the letters was from Lady Yang, and the other was actually from Royal Princess Duanjia. Lady Yang had sent the coral bracelet back again, saying that it was a gift for her anyway, and that she couldn't possibly take it back. She also said to keep the bracelet properly, and if they met in the future, she could make a few more different kinds of pastries as gifts instead. Although Lady Yang didn't state outright if they were on visiting terms with each other, this was already a great concession for Chu Lian, and could be counted as a good connection. What Chu Lian had found strange was Royal Princess Duanjia's letter. Royal Princess Duanjia had actually invited her over to Prince Wei's estate for a small gathering. Chapter 107. The Power of Snacks 3. Chu Lian remembered seeing Royal Princess Duanjia's mysterious goodwill towards her in the Dingyuan estate. She frowned. The novel had only mentioned Royal Princess Duanjia a few times, and she hadn't even properly made an entrance in the scenes that Chu Lian had read. She didn't know much about Royal Princess Duanjia's personality or Prince Wei's estate. However, since it was a royal princess who had sent her a proper invite, it wouldn't be good if she rejected it. There were many noble ladies in the capital who would love to get connected to Royal Princess Duanjia, but weren't able to. Besides, Chu Lian didn't hold any ill will towards her. After accepting Royal Princess Duanjia's invite, Senior Servant Gue and Senior Servant Zhong were happy as well. Royal Princess Duanjia was famed for being detached from the social circles of the nobility. At most, she would occasionally mix with some of the ladies from the imperial family, but she didn't have any known close friends amongst the nobility. Prince Wei was someone that even the most favored courtiers would have to pay respects to. So if Chu Lian could form a connection with Royal Princess Duanjia, even House Jingyan's prestige would rise a level. Dinner was at Qingxi Hall tonight. When Chu Lian arrived at the entrance, she could hear laughter coming from within. Chu Lian walked in curiously, and matriarch he waved her over. Sanlang's wife, come over. We were just talking about you. With the exception of Madame Zhou's two daughters, Chu Lian was the youngest amongst them. She obediently greeted all her seniors before she was pulled by matriarch he to sit on a soft chair, just one step below hers. Grandmother, what were you talking about me? Her inquisitive wide eyes made the matriarch smile again. Your eldest brother was just talking about those longevity peach buns you made at the Dingyuan estate. Grandmother tried them today as well. They're really tasty. Chu Lian smiled back and replied, It's good that grandmother likes them. They'll make more interesting ones for grandmother's birthday. Look at this. So those longevity peach buns weren't even the best ones. There are more interesting ones to be had. Everyone in the parlor laughed together. Chu Lian's sharp gaze swept over each member and picked out some unhappiness in Madame Zhou's eyes, so she quickly changed the topic. Second brother has come back early today. I heard that we're having venison for the banquet. Granddaughter-in-law can't wait. After Chu Lian changed the topic, she glanced at Madame Zhou again and noticed the lightening of her expression. However, He Changqi just had to add fuel to the fire at this moment. Third sister-in-law, since you know how to make those fine pastries, do you know how to cook a better dish of venison? Chu Lian cried out in her heart. Madame Zhou was already starting to dislike her, but her eldest brother just had to add that line. Venison's quite rare, so sister-in-law doesn't have any secret recipes for venison. When Chu Lian finished speaking, He Changqi's face practically radiated disappointment. Following that, the family ate their dinner together. Chu Lian didn't want her eldest sister-in-law to feel like she was taking the spotlight, so she didn't speak much during the meal, except to reply the matriarch. When she returned to Songtao Court afterwards, Chu Lian patted her chest in relief without minding her image one bit. She had been scared to bits. She hadn't thought that just making some desserts would be enough to draw her eldest sister-in-law's jealousy. It looked like her journey to become a peaceful layabout in the inner court wouldn't be that easy. Chu Lian hadn't even mentioned Lady Yang's gift of a coral bracelet and Royal Princess Duanjia's invite to her estate in front of the family. She wondered if Madame Zhou might misunderstand if she had spoken of it just now. After she had thought it through, Chu Lian decided to tell the matriarch alone when she made her morning greetings at Qingxi Hall the next day. Royal Princess Duanjia had invited her to meet at her estate on the 26th of the month. There were still 2 days left to prepare, so it wasn't too urgent. Chapter 108. A Peaceful Courtyard 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. On the way back to the main branch's courtyard with her husband, Madame Zhou's head remained lowered as she seemed to be in deep thought. However, He Changqi just had to move up beside her with a regretful expression as he lamented, if only third sister-in-law knew how to cook venison. I wonder how delicious that would be. Hearing this come from her own husband, Madame Zhou was frustrated beyond belief. Her footsteps paused for a moment before she quickened her pace, leaving her slow, dim-witted husband behind. Hey, Yuanjing, Yuanjing, slow down a little. It's dark and the paths are uneven. Madame Zhou bit her lip with a terrible expression on her face. Ever since her husband had come back yesterday, he had kept talking about how popular Chu Lian's longevity peach buns had been at Marquis Dingyuan's longevity feast. He had narrated the tale once to his mother, and then once more at the family dinner in Qingxi Hall. Now he was even expressing his regret that Chu Lian didn't know how to cook venison. As he Changqi's legitimate wife, how could she not be angry? So what if her sister-in-law was good at cooking? Chu Lian was Sanlang's wife, not He Changqi's. Madame Zhou felt extremely stifled by this treatment. If Chu Lian found out the reason behind her eldest sister-in-law's sudden irritation towards her, she definitely would have cried at her brother-in-law, He Changqi. Brother, why are you digging holes for me? Also, is eldest sister-in-law aware of how dense you are? As senior servant Gue was helping Chu Lian change for the night, she handed over the silver taels she had gotten from selling off the jewelry. She also passed over the items that Chu Lian had requested on her list. While heading towards her little study, Chu Lian opened the small wooden box that senior servant Gue had given to her. Inside were 4 small gold bricks, which sat together with the silver accessories she had ordered before. Senior servant Gue, who was following right behind her, hesitated for a moment before she spoke up. Third young madam, why don't you save these taels instead? Although we're living in the estate now, you're only a member of the 3rd branch, after all. Third young master won't be inheriting the family title. After the matriarch passes away, each branch of the family will undoubtedly be split up. With eldest young madam controlling the estate's finances, you won't get much for your expenses. Chu Lian turned and looked strangely at senior servant Gue. Under the light of the lanterns around them, her almond-shaped eyes were like shining stars and as clear as water. Momo, are you expecting me to get rich just by saving money? If detect device equals desktop, Google Tag. Command push function, Google Tag. Display, DIVGPT advn 3. Senior servant Gue turned speechless. After a pause, she tried to continue her persuasion. But you've just started managing your branch of the family. Perhaps it wouldn't be too good to spend so much right from the beginning. What she didn't say was that, if Chu Lian started bestowing rewards on people without any particular reason, it would be setting a hard precedent to live up to. If the servants were given regular rewards from then on, then they would definitely expect even more on special occasions. If not, the servants would become disappointed, making them hard to manage in the future. Furthermore, although those custom-made silver accessories weren't too expensive, they were all high-class designs. They would even be suitable for the imperial family to wear, let alone a few noble servants. By now, Chu Lian had already walked into her study and arrived at her desk. She set the wooden box down and took out the silver accessories within, moving them to a lacquered redwood tray, which Chu Lian had specially covered with a dark blue silk cloth. The contrast between the dark blue and the glint of the silver made the accessories shine even brighter. Coupled with the novelty of their designs, they were comparable to any set of gold accessories. Momo, don't worry. Didn't grandmother give me a restaurant? Chu Lian's reply was rather distracted as she happily arranged the accessories on the lacquered tray, separating them into different types. Senior servant Gue couldn't say a word. A restaurant? That lousy restaurant? It wasn't located in a busy area of the capital, the dishes were just average, and it couldn't even earn its upkeep. How could it be counted as a source of income for them? It would be good enough if they could break even. Senior servant Gue was seriously wondering if the matriarch had it out for Chu Lian, and if she had given Chu Lian that failing restaurant to make her pay for its upkeep. Chapter 109. A Peaceful Courtyard, 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Goodness, my dear third young madam, how could that restaurant possibly make any money? Please don't pin all your hopes on that restaurant. Chu Lian finally turned to look at senior servant Gue. Momo, I know that you only have my best interests at heart, but for matters like this, I know what I'm doing. Unlike her usually soft and kind voice, the Chu Lian of now carried the strict authority of a person in power. Senior servant Gue stiffened and quickly stopped speaking. Although third young madam's personality had changed, and she had become much more easygoing with them as compared to before, it didn't mean that senior servant Gue could overstep her bounds as a servant and think to change her master's decisions. She had committed one of the taboos as a servant. Finally realizing what she had done, senior servant Gue broke out into cold sweat. Chu Lian had the same thoughts. Although she didn't like being harsh towards others and preferred to live casually, even to the point of being a little dazed and silly at times, she never played around with important matters. She also had her own ideas and hated when others tried to make decisions for her. She knew that her way of thinking was very different from the way the people here thought. So upon arriving in the Great Wu dynasty, she had always tried to be as easygoing as possible. However, that didn't mean she would allow others to interfere with her choices. It was the same for the silver accessories today, as well as any important decisions from now on. This old servant understands. When Chu Lian saw that senior servant Gue had finally gotten the message, her expression softened and returned to her usual tender smile. Her gentle demeanor also returned. Momo, you have to trust me. Money is easy to earn. Chu Lian even broke out into a mischievous grin, blinking innocently at senior servant Gue. Although senior servant Gue was nodding on the surface, she didn't believe Chu Lian's words a single bit on the inside. Even though third young madam had a good head on her, due to her status back in the Ingwer estate, she hadn't been able to interact much with the outside world. Third young madam's stepmother had never really taught her much about the world either, so it would be normal if Chu Lian had good ideas, but not the experience to execute them well. Senior servant Gue sighed inwardly. It might be best to let third young madam suffer some setbacks so that she could understand clearly. After dismissing senior servant Gue from the room, Chu Lian kept the gold bricks in the wooden box. Now that she had these gold bricks at hand, she had a total capital of 600 taels. Although this was already a huge sum in the eyes of most people, it wasn't enough at all for Chu Lian. She opened up another brocade box on the side, this time to admire Imperial Princess Liao's golden qilin that sat within. The corners of her lips lifted up into a smile. Imperial Princess Liao, since you like your brother he so much, I'll let you donate the rest of my funds. Before heading off to sleep, Chu Lian flipped through the account book that matriarch he had given her for Gillen Restaurant. What she had was the accounts of the last 3 months. Since there were barely any customers, the records for all 3 months could fit into a single thin book. If detect device equals desktop, Google tag. Command push function, Google tag. Display, divgpt advent. And without even talking about whether the numbers would add up correctly in such a thin account book, Chu Lian couldn't agree on the way the accounts were being recorded. She could see that there were quite a few places where the records didn't make sense, just from skimming through them roughly. For example, the following entries. June 1st. Kitchen expenses, 1 tael. Kitchen expenses? What had they bought? Was it the fresh ingredients for the day, kitchen utensils, or even furniture? They had only described the expenditure in such vague terms that she had to suspect that there was embezzling going on. June 12th. 2. 5 kilograms of pork, 100 coins. Chinese cabbage, 10 coins. Tea leaves, 500 coins. There had only been 2 or 3 customers daily for the first half of June. At its lowest, there might not even be any customers at all. At the peak, there had never been more than 5 customers in a day. And amongst all these diners, only one person had even ordered a pork dish. This meant that Gillen Restaurant's pork dishes weren't very popular, so they shouldn't be buying more than 0.5 kilograms of pork a day. However, on that day, they had bought 5 times that amount. So they were using the company's accounts for their own expenses. She had only gone through a third of this thin account book, and she had already found so many suspicious points. There was no need to keep reading further. It looked like there wasn't just a problem in management for this Gillen Restaurant, but there were also some rats amongst the employees. Even if this group of embezzlers were to run the most popular restaurant in the entire capital, it would probably still be a losing business. Chapter 110. A Peaceful Courtyard, 3. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. The next day, Chu Lian told Matriarch He alone about the invite she had been given to Prince Wei's estate. The matriarch was overjoyed and held onto her hands before she instructed her to accept the invite without any worry. When she returned from Qingxi Hall, she told senior servant Zhong to gather all the maidservants in Songtao Court. Chu Lian handed over the matter to Xian and went off to her study to practice her writing. Xian held the lacquered redwood tray in her hands and announced to the parlor filled with maidservants, "Third young madam's birthday is coming soon." So a few days ago, she ordered these accessories to be made. She wanted to use this opportunity to award everyone and pass the fortune along. Xian's words had been carefully scripted by Chu Lian, and they weren't false in the least. The birthday of Chu Lian's current body was indeed within these 2 days, the 26th of July, to be exact. It just so happened to be the day that Royal Princess Duanjia had invited her to appear at Prince Wei's estate. She had to give a reason for this bestowal of gifts, otherwise the expectations of her servants would be raised too high. Although senior servant Gue hadn't said it outright yesterday, Chu Lian had already thought of this problem. This was exactly like how companies would give a bonus on certain holidays. It encouraged the employees to continue working there. Senior servant Gue froze for a moment. She had completely forgotten to give third young madam a reminder yesterday due to her panic in overstepping her boundaries. However, third young madam had still managed to come to the same conclusion, and as evident by Xian's speech, she had already taken the necessary steps to avoid the problem. A tinge of guilt seeped into senior servant Gue's heart. When all the servants heard that there would be rewards today, all of their faces were filled with joy. Xian coughed twice, and they all settled down into silence. Third young madam has passed down these orders. Second-class maidservants are to pick 1 silver hairpin and 2 rings each. Third-class maidservants are to take 1 silver hairpin and 1 ring each. As for those without any ranks, they are to take 1 ring each. Then, Xian handed the tray in her hands over to Wenqing, instructing her to pass it around for the rest. Everyone was overjoyed and said in unison, "Many thanks to third young madam for the rewards. Do your work properly from now on. As long as you do a good job, third young madam will surely reward you again. However, anyone who doesn't follow the rules will be immediately kicked out of Songtao Court." Upon hearing Xian's strict reminder, the voices of everyone present blended together into a single, unanimous answer. "We will do our jobs properly." Baicha was one of the menial servants working in Songtao Court. Her parents were both family servants of the Jing'an estate. However, they hadn't been able to rise in the ranks. At first, her mother had been in charge of tending the fire in the main kitchen. When the main kitchen had been lit aflame, her mother had been burned. Now she couldn't even get up from bed. Her father had been running errands for one of the main stewards in the outer court. However, a few years ago, someone had set him up to take the fall for embezzling some funds from the estate. He had been punished by eldest young madam and was now working in the stables, shoveling horse manure. Perhaps due to the shock, he had become an alcoholic, getting drunk every day. Her 2 older brothers weren't in very high positions in the estate either. Baicha had started working as a menial servant since she was 10. Even after 4 years had passed, she was still sweeping floors in the estate. She had wanted to try catching third young master's eye, but third young madam had entered the estate then. If detect device equals desktop, Google Tag. Command push, function, Google Tag. Display, DIVGPT advent. Since third young master had suddenly left the estate for the northern border, Baicha could only do her job quietly. However, her mother's health was deteriorating, and she desperately needed money to get a doctor for her mother. All the funds at home had been taken away by her father for drinks. She was right at the point of no hope when Chu Lian had suddenly bestowed these rewards. She grasped the 3-leaf clover ring tightly in her hand, her eyes full of gratitude as she looked towards the main bedroom of the courtyard. Chapter 111. A Growing Distance. 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Chu Lian didn't know that her decision to bestow rewards to keep her courtyard peaceful had calmed the fire in the heart of one of her maidservants. When everyone received their silver hairpins and rings, their faces filled with pleasant surprise. One by one, the servants inspected their rewards and immediately realized that these were no ordinary accessories. Firstly, the craftsmanship was excellent. Secondly, their designs were so lovely that they couldn't bear to sell them off. For servants of an estate, the majority of them could only wear roughly made silver earrings. Their finest jewelry were those same types of earrings engraved with a few simple patterns. However, the accessories that third young madam had bestowed upon them were completely different. These earrings were perfectly sized, and there were many different shapes. Three-leaf clovers, hearts. There were also some other patterns that they didn't know the names for, but regardless, all of the earrings looked beautiful. Some of the younger and more vain maidservants immediately put them on. These accessories looked so exquisitely made. Surely only the capital's Tsuan Pavilion could have made them. Third young madam had really spent a lot of effort on this reward. Initially, the servants had thought that there was no future in serving the third branch of the He family. Third young madam didn't have much status and was merely a young lady from the Ingwa estate known for bearing sons. She didn't seem to have any other redeeming qualities that had brought her into the Jing'an estate. And just a few days after their marriage, third young master had left, so the servants became even less diligent in carrying out their duties. However, based on third young madam's gifts today and Miss Xian's words, they would definitely work harder from now on. Getting silver accessories as rewards wasn't something very common amongst the servants. Taking Baicha's mother as an example, although she had served in the Jing'an estate for her whole life, she had only gotten 2 or 3 pieces of silver accessories. Those had been bestowed by the old madam only when she had gotten married. The servants who had gotten their rewards dispersed happily. When Xian was done with the distribution, she reported to Chu Lian in the study. Chu Lian set down the account book in her hands and stood up. She picked up the case next to her and walked out to the outer room before calling senior servant Zhong, senior servant Gue, and her 4 handmaids to her. She pushed the case towards them. I had these prepared specially for all of you. You're my most trusted servants, so I couldn't possibly miss your share of rewards. Fuyin had been wondering why all the lower-class servants had gotten rewards, while she and the other personal maidservants hadn't gotten a single thing. She hadn't thought that third young madam had already prepared their share and was waiting to pass it to them. Fuyin had seen all the silver accessories being handed out. They were finely made and their designs were beautiful and novel. Even just looking at them, she found it difficult to hold back her desire. Senior servant Zhong acted like senior servant Gue had the day before. She looked at Chu Lian with a disapproving gaze. How could third young madam act this way? Handing out rewards so generously the moment she entered the estate was a grossly inappropriate use of money. However, she didn't say a word out loud. She simply kept score in her heart, preparing to report all of this in a letter to third young master. Wenqing and Wanlan were just second-class maidservants, so of course, they weren't included in the share for Chu Lian's personal handmaids. Come here, take a look and see which ones you like the most. When the case was opened, pairs of golden earrings and rings were revealed. There were 2 sets of accessories that had more traditional designs and contained more gold. Chu Lian had prepared those 2 sets for the 2 senior servants. The other sets were made of more new and interesting designs with lovelier patterns. One pair of earrings was shaped like peach blossoms. They were pretty within the box, but they were even more charming when worn. 2 delicate, golden peach blossoms glinting against the curve of a young lady's ears. The earrings and rings were slim and the patterns were drawn exactly to Chu Lian's designs, so they didn't use up too much gold. This was all that was made from melting the 2 golden hairpins she had gotten from her childhood jewelry box. These golden accessories' main value laid in the exquisite, novel patterns that they had. They suited Xian and the other young ladies well. All the handmaids were jumping for joy. Senior servant Zhong looked at the pair of earrings and ring in her hands and snorted arrogantly in her heart. Third young madam, even if you try to bribe me like this, I'll still report everything to third young master, word for word. I definitely won't put in a single good word for you. Chu Lian smiled and waved them away to return to their own tasks. Chapter 112, A Growing Distance, 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. In the blink of an eye, it was already the day of the visit to Prince Wei's estate. Chu Lian rose early that morning and personally cooked a bowl of shredded chicken longevity noodles for her own birthday. She also accepted some embroidery from her maidservants as gifts. When she went to Qingxi Hall for her daily greetings, matriarchy gave her a bolt of lake blue silk fabric. Even the bedridden Countess Jing'an sent her handmaid, Miaozhen, over with a kilogram of sencha. Her eldest sister-in-law, Madame Zhou, was the only one who hadn't given her anything. Right after bidding goodbye to matriarchy, Chu Lian immediately boarded a carriage, carrying the confections she had made this morning to Prince Wei's estate. Back at Qingxi Hall, Madame Zhou had just brought over her 2 daughters to give their daily greetings. Matriarchy frowned a little and tested her with a question. Dalong's wife, do you remember if there's any special occasions today? Due to the heat of the day, Madame Zhou had been a little absent-minded since she had woken up. Hearing this, she asked curiously, a special occasion? When the matriarch saw that she hadn't reacted at all to her test, she set down her teacup. It's nothing. Perhaps my memory's getting a little muddled in my old age. Madame Zhou rushed to reassure her. Grandmother, your body's still healthy and strong. How could you possibly be muddled? Has granddaughter-in-law missed out on something? Granddaughter-in-law still needs grandmother to give her reminders. The matriarch looked at this granddaughter-in-law of hers. Madame Zhou had married into the Jing'an estate for close to 10 years now. Although she wasn't the best at managing the estate, she did a good enough job of it. At the very least, there weren't any obvious mistakes in her work. Why had Madame Zhou started making mistakes the moment Sanlang's wife entered the estate? She had been observing her for the past few days. Dalong's wife seemed to look a little haggard, and she was no longer as orderly in her tasks. Her strength seemed to be lacking now. She had even forgotten the birthday of Sanlang's wife. There was a small booklet recording the birthdays of every master in the estate. When it came to someone's birthday, they would distribute some funds from the public accounts to each branch of the family for a birthday celebration. Matriarchy took another sip of tea and kept quiet. Instead, it was Madame Zhou who asked, Grandmother, I just heard one of the servants report. 3rd sister-in-law has gone out? The matriarch nodded. Sanlang's wife received an invite from Royal Princess Duanjia, so she's gone to Prince Wei's estate for a small gathering. What? Royal Princess Duanjia? Madame Zhou instantly went through a raging storm of emotions. She knew clearly how influential Prince Wei was. Prince Wei was the emperor's brother and a leisurely prince. When the emperor had been fighting the other princes for the throne, Prince Wei had contributed much to his efforts. However, when the emperor had ascended to the throne, Prince Wei had handed over all the authority in his hands and requested that he become a layabout prince. Due to the guilt he felt towards Prince Wei, as well as the fact that they shared the same mother, the emperor thought very highly of this brother of his. Since Royal Princess Duanjia was Prince Wei's only daughter, she was pampered to the same degree of any imperial princess. Although Prince Wei didn't hold any power now, he was officially the next in line to become the imperial clan leader. Why hadn't she heard anything about 3rd sister-in-law going to Prince Wei's estate? Shocked, Madame Zhou could do nothing but look at the matriarch. The matriarch didn't even twitch as she said, Royal Princess Duanjia sent someone over with an invite 2 days ago. I forgot to mention it. It's not Sanlang's wife's fault. After hearing the matriarch's explanation, Madame Zhou's eyes darkened. She sat for another 10 minutes before leaving and taking her daughters with her. TL note: a nice and simple bowl of noodles with shredded chicken, mmm. Also, happy birthday Chu Lian. The Chinese usually eat longevity noodles on their birthdays as a wish to have a long and healthy life. It's usually a family member, aka mom, who cooks it for you, making it even more heartwarming. I've had these noodles once or twice for a birthday before too, but we usually have birthday cake instead nowadays. 3. I found a blog post about it in English, so you can read more about this custom here. Shredded chicken noodles. Chapter 113. The Northern Border, 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Matriarchy watched Madame Zhou leave. That girl looked more haggard by the day. she mused. Her fingers tapped gently on the table beside her as she began to consider some thoughts she had previously set aside. A few days ago, Countess Jingen had mentioned the matter of letting her eldest son, Dalong, take a concubine to the matriarch. Truthfully speaking, the matriarch had been waiting for a great-grandson for much too long. She had given Dalong's wife 10 years, but there was still no news. After He Changdi and Liyue passed Zhangzhou and went as far north as they could go, they took to the water and reached Qizhou. They then changed horses and continued northward. After half a month of harsh travel, they finally reached the northern border of the Great Wu Dynasty, Liangzhou. Looking at the endless grasslands of the northern border, memories from He Changdi's past life bubbled to the surface. His heart was a mess of muddled emotions. Liyue rode his horse up to his young master's side before asking, "Young master, are we entering the city directly?" He Changdi shook his head and pointed in another direction. Liyue turned his gaze over, only to see a few scattered tents dotted yonder on the boundless grassy plains. He gulped, but didn't say a word. Throughout their journey, the fuse on third young master's temper had just grown shorter and shorter. He wore a gloomy expression around all day and practically radiated the aura of a porcupine. "Don't touch me." Liyue subconsciously took a deep breath and instantly regretted it. He looked down at his own travel-worn clothing, fighting the urge to throw himself into a pool of water. He was emitting the stink of the century here, and it was to the point where he was about to lose his sense of smell. He hadn't thought that third young master, who had always loved cleanliness, could actually keep traveling without bothering to wash the dirt off his body. It was full summer right now. The last time they had properly cleaned themselves was back when they had left Qizhou. The further north they went, the fewer pools and lakes they could find. Since they were rushing to their destination, they were living roughly. A normal thing like a bath had become a luxury. Now that they had arrived at the uncivilized northern plains, they were surrounded by grassland all around. There weren't even that many tents, let alone any inns or restaurants where they could rest in. Liyue secretly shot a glance at third young master. His fitted gray riding clothes were already stained with dirt, and there were even a few tears here and there. His black hair had been tied up at the back of his head, but the journey had made it a mess. Dark stubble was already growing all over his chin due to the lack of shaving. Half a month of traveling out in the sun and wind had made third young master not only more tan, but also skinnier than before. The corners of Liyue's mouth twitched. If his young master were to ride along the streets of the capital now, probably no one would be able to connect this coarse man with the He family's Sanlang the Fair. Master and servant urged their horses towards the scattered tents in the distance. Just as they arrived, a slightly plump madam happened to walk out of one of the tents, carrying some butter and tea as she pushed up the tent flaps. Seeing the two strangers, she looked over curiously and spoke in some gibberish that Liyue couldn't understand. Liyue stared at the madam. Although he had expected the northern border to be harsh and cruel, he hadn't thought that they wouldn't be able to communicate. The madam spoke a bunch of words to them, but Liyue still couldn't understand a single one. He felt a headache building. He turned to his master helplessly. Who could have expected that He Changdi would get off his horse, walk up to the madam, and speak in the same gibberish? Liyue couldn't understand a thing. However, after he was done, took out a stamp from the purse at his waist and passed it to the madam. The madam eyed the stamp for a long time, holding it up to the light to see it better. Suddenly, she practically leapt for joy and returned the stamp to He Changdi. She then respectfully bowed 90 degrees to him, before pulling He Changdi into the tent. Liyue was stunned. He didn't know how his young master had suddenly learned how to speak a barbarian language. And looking at the way he had spoken, he was extremely fluent too. Liyue stood stock-still as he held the horse's reins, completely dazed. His feet had become one with the ground due to his shock. In the end, He Changdi had to turn around and shout at him before he regained his senses. In a moment, a half-grown teenager stepped out from the tent, smiling widely as he tried to take the reins of the horses from Liyue. He Changdi noticed that Liyue wasn't moving, so he instructed, "Give the horses to him. He'll help us take care of them." Liyue then handed the reins over to the grinning Tantin. Liyue caught up to his young master in a few steps. He scratched his head helplessly and said, "Young master, this servant doesn't understand." He Sanling glared at his manservant. "What are you blanking out for? Just follow me." Liyue quickly nodded. However, not even a minute had passed before he was no longer able to hold back his curiosity. "Young master, when did you learn how to speak the barbarian language of the northern border?" This servant didn't realize you could do that at all. He Sanling looked at Liyue in contempt. "With your wits, it's normal that you didn't know. All you think about all day is eating." Poor Liyue didn't dare to ask again. All he did was eat a bowl of third young madam's braised meat with rice. That bowl of rice had even been leftovers from the maidservant's meal. Third young master had been ridiculing him for that one bowl the whole way here. What injustice! However, upon remembering that braised meat, saliva gathered in Liyue's mouth. That thick sauce and fatty meat. With one bite, the taste lingered in his mouth for hours. It was the most delicious meat he had ever eaten in his life. If he could have another bowl right now, he would put the entirety of it on another bowl of rice. 3 huge servings of that wouldn't be a problem. Wait, no, maybe he could even eat the entire pot of rice. As he thought of the harsh journey they had gone through to get here, Liyue missed that delicious food even more. Chapter 114. The Northern Border, 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. He Sanling experienced an instant of confusion. Barbarian language? His fluency with it was all because he had been exiled to the northern border in his previous life. He had lived amongst the lowest of the barbarians for 3 years, suffering all the hardships there were in this world. After all that, how could he possibly not know the most basic language amongst them? Thinking back to those dark days, Changdi's hands clenched into fists, hidden under his sleeves. However, the heavens had been kind to him. They had given him a chance to redo it all. When they entered the tent, a short but sturdy barbarian came up to welcome them. He placed his right hand over his heart and bowed respectfully to Changdi. Changdi nodded and headed towards the short table in the center of the tent. He waited for the barbarian to sit together with him. In a moment, the madam they had met outside brought in 2 earthenware jars. The barbarian man indicated for him to go ahead, in the manner of the Han people. Changdi didn't stand on ceremony and filled the roughly made bowl before him with food. He ate one bite before jerking his head towards Liyue, who was kneeling behind him, indicating for him to eat as well. The 2 of them hadn't eaten for almost a day in their rush to reach Liangzhou. Their empty stomachs were growling by now. They had relied on each other along the way. So Changdi didn't bother with keeping up with his noble airs and simply treated Liyue as a comrade. Each time they entered an inn to eat, they always shared a table. Liyue didn't reject the offer and followed Changdi's example to fill up a bowl of food for himself. Due to his hunger, he drank a huge gulp of the food in the bowl immediately. However, the moment the food touched his tongue, Liyue's face contorted. He secretly glanced at his master, only to see that Changdi's expression hadn't changed at all, and that he was eating the food in the bowl with small bites. It was only because of that Liyue managed to swallow the mouthful he had taken. Looking down at the black, strange substance in his bowl, Liyue completely lost the courage to take another bite. What was this made of? It was harder to swallow than the steamed buns they had on the way here. The barbarians couldn't possibly be eating only this every day, could they? After a while, Sanling had already elegantly polished off all the food in his bowl. He looked calmly at his manservant. "Finish it all. There's nothing else to eat here. You'll go hungry otherwise." Liyue looked at his master's empty bowl. With no choice, he faced his own bowl and valiantly did battle with the food in it, not daring to taste it at all. That food was the northern border's specialty, Chinese olive porridge. Although the taste wasn't very good, it was the main source of food for the barbarians living here. In Changdi's past life, even this terrible porridge was hard to come by. He could only have it once a month, thanks to a barbarian woman who pitied him and secretly brought him some every month. Upon tasting this flavor again, Changdi had initially thought that he might reminisce about his past, or even like the taste of it this time. However, he didn't feel anything special at all upon tasting it. He stared at the steam rising from the earthenware jars, going into a daze. The Chinese olive porridge on the table slowly changed into steaming hot scallion pancakes and wontons. His companion at the table changed into a lovely, innocent young woman who would stare at him huffily from time to time. The look in her eyes was accusing him of being a big eater who had snatched away the food she had carefully made. The taste of those delicious wontons and crispy scallion pancakes seemed to slowly cover up the flavor of that Chinese olive porridge, causing him to forget what he was actually eating. Sanlang suddenly pinched his own palm fiercely. His eyes froze over into pools of black jade. Damn it! Was he cursed or what? Why was he thinking of that wicked woman again? He replayed the tragedies that he had faced in his past life in his mind, reminding himself that all the hardship he had gone through was caused by that woman and that woman alone. He slowly shut his eyes. When he opened them again, they were back to his usual clear gaze. Liu set down his bowl with all sorts of emotions on his face and turned towards his young master with a pitiful look. The barbarian man was sitting across from him. He found Liu's expressions amusing, so he openly burst out into peals of laughter before ordering the woman to clear the table and serve some fermented milk. Liu was more careful with what he ate this time. He picked up the fermented milk before him and sipped a tiny mouthful. Although it couldn't be compared to the capital's cheapest yellow rice wine, it was heavenly compared to that Chinese olive porridge. The barbarian man smiled again upon seeing Liu's change of expressions. He turned to He Changdi to speak. Liu couldn't understand anything, but he did see the barbarian man pause in his words to pull out a small pouch, handing it over to his young master with both hands. Sanlang opened up the small pouch and took out the 2 letters inside. Following that, he glanced at the remaining things in the pouch and balled it up before he stuffed it into the sack he carried with him at all times. When Liu noticed the seal on the back of the letters, his expression turned more serious. Those 2 letters had been sent along Prince Jin's connections. He Changdi first opened the letter from Prince Jin and skimmed through it. No change in emotions could be discerned from his face. Next, he opened the other letter. The handwriting in this letter wasn't as bold as the previous one, but was more neat and orderly. This had been written by Senior Servant Zhong. There were 5 pages in total, minuscule words covering every blank space on the letter. They reported every single thing that Chulian had done in the 2 weeks he had been away from the Jing'an estate, big or small. Sanlang's face noticeably cooled as he read the letter. At the same time, a trace of doubt surfaced in his eyes, unseen by the rest. Changdi continued reading. When he reached certain parts, his mouth couldn't help but twitch in response. TL note: I couldn't find pictures of the Chinese olive porridge that they're eating, but since it's supposed to look terrible, maybe like this? Poison cooking, just kidding. Here's a picture of the Chinese olives instead. XD Chinese olives. Chapter 115. Don't bother shaving. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Senior Servant Zhong's letter was written as if she were talking, devoid of any flowery language. As he read, Sanlang could clearly feel Senior Servant Zhong's joy and gratitude. This was what was written in the letter. This old servant didn't know about third young madam's great culinary skills. The meals in Songtao court are different every time. Third young madam understands and sympathizes with us lowly servants, so this old servant was also blessed with the chance to taste her delicious food. With this old servant's age and old teeth, it was the shredded chicken noodles that suited my taste the most. No, there were also the silver floss flour rolls. The poria mushroom buns were good too. After living for so long, it was the first time this old servant experienced such appetite. This old servant has to be frank. The hour that this old servant looks forward to the most is meal time. There was still a huge paragraph at the end. Perhaps it was because Senior Servant Zhong couldn't stop writing once she started talking about third young madam's cooking. When she finally came to her senses and realized that she had written far too much, the only thing she could do was forcefully change the topic. Third young madam is someone who likes to eat a lot. While third young master is at the northern border, please don't worry about third young madam's health. Young master, please take care of yourself and eat more every day. Changdi felt the urge to spit up blood. He barely managed to rein in his frustrations. This senior servant Zhong, after mentioning so many delicious dishes, she actually told him to eat more. Couldn't she remember that he was in the bitter north? There was nothing to eat here. Sanling looked down at the fermented milk before him and suddenly felt like it was too hard to swallow. That wicked woman was poisonous indeed. She actually used food to bribe his people over. Sanling's handsome face contorted. He secretly decided to remind senior servant Zhong in his next reply not to forget her orders after eating that wicked woman's cooking. She wasn't supposed to be bought over that easily. Finally, he read about the whole fiasco at the Dingyuan estate. Sanling's eyes dimmed down considerably. The hand that was holding the letter tightened. How could this be? The series of events at the Dingyuan estate had turned out completely different. That wicked woman had actually gotten connected to Royal Princess Duanjia because of that? Changdi suppressed the shock in his heart and quickly thought up a plan. In the last paragraph, senior servant Zhong rebuked Chu Lian a little for not knowing how to manage her finances. According to senior servant Zhong, Chu Lian had used a flimsy reason like her birthday to bestow rewards upon every servant in the courtyard. Birthday? Rewards? Changdi knew exactly when Chu Lian's birthday was, of course. However, there was no need to help celebrate the birthday of a woman he hated so much. It seemed she was still able to entertain herself without him, though, whimsically rewarding the servants like that. When he read in senior servant Zhong's letter that she herself had gotten a pair of golden earrings and a golden ring, Changdi snorted coldly. Contempt filled his heart. Did she think that a small gift like that would be able to win the loyalty of the servants he ordered to watch her? Dream on. Sanling didn't know why he was getting so angry. Wasn't his hatred bone deep already? He should be accustomed to her wicked schemes by now. In this life, he wanted to be a strong lion, hiding and biding his time with all the cards in his hand. But in reality, he had never been able to hold back his anger. Time and time again, he impulsively leaped straight into a blinding rage, and it was all thanks to that wicked woman. It was as if his self-restraint disappeared, and he lost his temper the moment he noticed that she did anything differently from his previous life. He knew about the pitiful state of Chu Lian's dowry immediately after she married into the Jing'an estate. In his past life, he had helped by adding to it. In this life, he wanted to see her suffer. Didn't she like rewarding the servants to feed her own ego? In that case, he would eagerly wait for the day she spent all of her family fortune. Off to the side, Laiwe had been carefully watching his master's expression. His curiosity was eating him alive. He wanted to know what was going on with his young master, or why his expression was changing so much during the course of reading one single letter. From clear rage to savage vindictiveness, and then a cold sneer. Laiwe shrunk back into himself. Despite the day's blazing weather, he felt chills roll down his spine. As if he knew what Changdi was going to do, the barbarian man stood up and personally fetched a brush and paper. Changdi sent a look towards the two people next to him, and they moved to stand off to one side. When Changdi was done with his reply, he sealed it in an envelope and passed it to the barbarian man. The barbarian man nodded and carefully slid the envelope into his clothes. Changdi and Laiwe rested for a while longer inside the tent. Eventually, the woman who had left earlier returned with the young teen looking after the horses. He was carrying a giant wooden tub as he came in. The teenager walked in and out of the tent, carrying buckets of hot water and filling up the wooden tub. Laiwe finally realized that this was probably meant for the young master to bathe. When everything was done, only Laiwe remained in the tent to serve his master. Changdi soaked in the bathtub, letting out a comfortable sigh. His long arms were placed on the sides of the tub, showing off his growing muscles. He didn't look too slender in his clothes either. Laiwe used a cloth to wipe his master's back. When he was done washing his master's hair, Laiwe noticed the stubble on his face. He took out a razor he always carried with him and was about to help his young master shave it off. Changdi noticed his movements and pushed him away. There's no need to shave my stubble. Leave it like this. Laiwe froze up a little. The standards of beauty in the Great Wu dynasty were similar to that of the Wei and Jin dynasties. Men with fair skin would have plenty of admirers. Thus, in the brothels, the male prostitutes would add powder onto their faces to make themselves more fair. This happened not only in the brothels, but even some noble sons would apply powder before heading out to meet their friends. Some would even wear flowers in their hair. The young nobles didn't much like leaving a beard, either. It was because of this aesthetic that Xiao Bojian could attract so many admirers with his feminine looks. While He Sanlang didn't imitate those other men by adding flowers to his hair, he would always keep a clean appearance. He was born handsome, without appearing too feminine. His heroic and manly appearance, coupled with his slightly cool, arrogant aura, made him appear haughty, but in an elegant manner rather than an outrageous one. It was enough to make the hearts of his admirers beat wildly. However, that once handsome face was now half covered with black stubble. There was nothing good-looking about it now. Due to He Changdi's volatile emotions today, Laiwet didn't dare disobey his order and did not shave his stubble. He could only put the razor away. TL note, and you guys were hating on senior servant Zhong a few chapters back. Courtesy of Chu Lian's ardent food fan, SSC. We have an overload of food picks today: dry shredded chicken noodles, silver floss flour rolls, rose-shaped flour rolls. Poria mushroom buns. Poria is a Chinese herb that's commonly used in traditional Chinese medicine. It's supposedly sweet and mild in flavor. Oh, the flour rolls are basically a fancy-looking type of mantou or plain steamed bun. I found a recipe for them here, http://hunger blogspot sg/2011/07/flour buns. HTML post pics in the comments if you try it out. 3. Chapter 116. The Haughty Spoiled Princess. 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. After running through the downtown area for an hour, the Jing'an estate's carriage finally arrived at the main entrance of Prince Wei's estate. Without waiting for Chu Lian to send a manservant over to the guardhouse with the invitation, a senior servant who had been waiting by the entrance led 2 younger maidservants over to welcome her. Chu Lian had just gotten off the carriage with Xian's help when the welcoming senior servant asked with a bright smile, "Excuse me, could this lady be House Jing'an's young madam?" Wenlan bobbed in greeting to the senior servant in front of her and replied, "It is." "Third young madam, we've been waiting for you. Our royal princess sent this old servant to wait by the entrance much earlier. Please, come in with us." The senior servant was only about 30 years old. The combination of her round face, warm tone, and friendly smile gave off a good first impression. "Then I'll have to trouble Momo." When Chu Lian entered Prince Wei's estate, the senior servant had even prepared a sedan for her. With 2 menial servants hoisting it, they reached Royal Princess Duanjia's courtyard in 8 minutes. Prince Wei's estate was much more imposing than the Jing'an estate. There were decorative mountains, pavilions, covered corridors, and drawing rooms all over the place. Everywhere she looked, there would be beautiful scenery awaiting her eyes. No wonder Prince Wei's estate was considered the first amongst the top 3 estates in the capital. Chu Lian looked at everything with wide, clear eyes. She openly admired her surroundings. Although this behavior couldn't be considered dignified or elegant, her innocent and honest expressions made it hard to have a bad impression of her. At least, it was much better compared to the ladies who would feign a reserved manner despite their curiosity, while their eyes were full of jealousy and envy. Chu Lian sat on the sedan admiring the scenery in Prince Wei's estate. She felt that this garden wouldn't lose one bit to the humble administrator's garden in the modern world. When she noticed a pavilion as tall as a decorative mountain in the distance, Chu Lian looked it over for a while longer out of curiosity. The senior servant following next to Chu Lian kindly provided an explanation for Chu Lian. "Third young madam, that pavilion is called Buliu Pavilion. The signboard above it is a valuable piece of calligraphy, reportedly written by a great scholar from the previous dynasty, Chu Buliu. That pavilion is a great place to cool off on a hot day like today. When the wind blows, it's very refreshing." Chu Lian nodded and smiled. With her tender smile, pure gaze, and honest personality, as well as the fact that she was someone that the royal princess had personally invited over, the senior servant's gaze lent more towards goodwill. When they reached Royal Princess Duanjia's courtyard, one of the servants supported Chu Lian as she got off the sedan. When she looked up, Royal Princess Duanjia was standing in the corridor outside the parlor. When she walked up to the princess, Royal Princess Duanjia raised an eyebrow and looked her up and down. The moment the princess noticed the box of food Xiyin was carrying, surprise lit up in her eyes. She strode up to Xiyin and took the box from her hands. Royal Princess Duanjia then raised her chin slightly, turning to Chu Lian as she said, "Chu Lu, this is for me, right?" Chu Lian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She hadn't expected the precious royal princess she had met at the Dingyuan estate to have such a tsundere personality. She nodded, and with a forgiving tone, Chu Lian said, "I made these myself this morning. They're for you, royal princess." Chu Lian's voice was soft and kind. Although she was already a married woman, other than the difference in hairstyles from the maiden princess, she looked like a young lady who was still the same age as Royal Princess Duanjia. While Royal Princess Duanjia's status was much higher than hers, Chu Lian didn't act differently in front of her. Instead, she treated the princess like a sister from the same family, without any of the usual fear or carefulness that others might have. This raised her evaluation in Royal Princess Duanjia's eyes. Without waiting for Chu Lian's greeting bow, Royal Princess Duanjia took her hand and led her to the parlor. After the two of them were seated, Royal Princess Duanjia ordered her handmaid to serve the confections that Chu Lian had brought. When the confections were brought out in two little porcelain dishes, Royal Princess Duanjia stared at them in a daze. There were 6 pieces of confections sitting on one of the exquisite blue porcelain dishes, and there were 2 pieces of every color, milky yellow, light green, and light red. The flat confections had somehow been made into cutely shaped cat heads. Every cat had a different expression, provoking amusement in the onlookers. Chu Lian smiled a little as she watched Royal Princess Duanjia gape in surprise. As expected, girls liked cute little confections the most. She had made a set of cookies. The 3 different colors also signified the 3 different flavors of the cookies: milk, matcha, and red date. She had used a cat head-shaped mold that she had prepared in advance to make them, and then used some natural food coloring to draw some simple, adorable little expressions on top. The cookies were done after a round of baking in the oven. It was much simpler to make these compared to the 8 confections. On the other plate was a display of sugared haw fruits. They were round and red, covered in a layer of white icing sugar. Though they weren't as sour as eating the haw fruits by themselves, they weren't sickly sweet either. In addition, the seeds inside had already been removed, so there was no need to spit out anything. They were both delicious and convenient, and were great for snacking. Royal Princess Duanjia's eyes were sparkling as she looked at the confections before her. Her handmaid was also absorbed in staring at the snacks, but she managed to regain her senses and hurriedly turned to serve some tea. TL note: since Chu Lian is the 6th Miss Chu, Duanjia affectionately calls her Chu Lu 6. The humble administrator's garden is an actual place and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Check out the wiki page for the backstory on this amazing garden, https://n. Wikipedia. org/wiki/humble administrator %27is for garden. And now for food porn. Chu Lian probably didn't add the icing on the cookies, but look at these. They're so cute. Cat head-shaped cookies. Sugared haw fruits. Haw is quite sour by itself, so it's usually eaten with sugar. One of my childhood snacks was haw flakes, basically a sweet and sour little flake. 3. I found it on Amazon, so you can get some to try it for yourself if you'd like. https://www.amazon.com/hawflakes rolls traditional Chinese/DP/B0007XQWXE/. This is not an affiliate link, just a normal 1xd. Chapter 117. The Haughty Spoiled Princess 2. When Chu Lian saw that the maid was about to serve this world's terrible sancha, she grimaced. She quickly stopped the maid and said, "Princess, this dessert doesn't go along with sancha. I'll spoil the taste." Hearing that, the princess lost her usual noble bearing as she rolled her eyes at Chu Lian. "Chu Lu, you're just saying that because you don't like to drink sancha, right?" From the shine of Chu Lian's eyes, she could see that she was just trying to make up an excuse. The corner of Chu Lian's mouth twitched speechlessly. This princess was way too clever. Princess Duanjia's personal maidservant laughed in response. "Third young madam, please be at ease. Our princess doesn't like sencha either. This servant will be pouring honey water, not sencha. Chu Lian sheepishly chuckled. How awkward. Princess Duanjia picked up a match-flavored cookie and asked curiously, Chu Lu, can you tell me how you made this cookie? Inwardly, Princess Duanjia was thinking to herself, Chu Lu must have come up with the name herself. It's so weird and so inelegant. Humph, all she knows how to do is eat. Chu Lian was quite surprised. In the past few days, she had made quite a number of delicacies which exceeded the current standards of the Great Wu dynasty. Although every dish she made had received tremendous praise, since the people here guarded their secret recipes even more preciously than their own lives. No one had ever straight out asked her for the recipe. That is, until she met Princess Duanjia. Chu Lian didn't quite know how to react for a moment. Princess, do you really want to know? Of course, do you think I'm kidding? Princess Duanjia rolled her eyes at her again. Chu Lian's eyes were wide open by now, and her thick eyelashes trembled as she blinked. Since you're that curious about how the cookies were made, well, it's hard to say. It could be hard for some and easy for others. Then make it easy for me. Chu Lian almost choked. All she could do was gather up her patience and begin to recite the instructions. To make these cookies, you'll need butter, eggs, flour, and sugar. Prepare all these ingredients first, then mix the butter, add in the sugar, throw in the beaten eggs, and stir the mixture. After mixing them thoroughly, add the flour and stir. Shape the dough as you like, then just bake it. However, it won't be easy for most people to grasp how to mix and bake it properly. Although Chu Lian made it sound simple, it was practically impossible for the people of this era to make a proper cookie without experience. They would probably be in over their heads just trying to deal with the butter alone. The recipe was only simple to Chu Lian. It was a completely different matter for other people. Princess Duanjia frowned. So that means for most people, it'll be very hard to bake this cookie? Chu Lian nodded. Princess, something like this cute matcha cookie you're holding will require even more steps to make. If you want to try making some, you could learn how to make a simple cookie first, without making any special shapes. No way. I want to make one shaped like a cat's head, and it has to be match-flavored. Chu Lian's suffering showed a little in her expression, but without waiting for her to gather her thoughts, Princess Duanjia spoke again. Bring more cookies the next time you come over. Remember, they must be shaped like cat heads, and they have to be as cute as this one. I won't let you go if they're not cute. A little embarrassed by her own words, Princess Duanjia pouted. Her awkward expression was rather endearing. Once again, Chu Lian replied with a stupefied, "Ah?" After some thought, she realized that she had been invited by the princess again. She suddenly thought that Princess Duanjia's awkward expression was actually pretty adorable. Chu Lian smiled. All right, they'll bring some other flavors next time. Princess Duanjia's eyes lit up, but she immediately followed it up with a pout. Who wants you to come? I just want to eat more of these cute cat-shaped snacks. TL note, in case anyone missed my edit last chapter, Chu Lian is the sixth Miss Chu, so Duanjia affectionately calls her Chu Lu 6. Chapter 118, Yueheng Restaurant's Roast Duck, 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Chu Lian didn't expect the regal, aloof royal Princess Duanjia from Mei Court to turn out more like an awkward, endearingly haughty child. Her smile grew even wider. Of course I understand, right? I'm the only one you can make cat cookies for. Otherwise, I'll make you answer for your crime. Chu Lian took a mental note. Royal Princess Duanjia was not only awkward and endearingly haughty, she was also very possessive. The two of them dined on sweet desserts and honey water as they sat in the parlor. Sometime during their tete-a-tete, Princess Wei belatedly brought over some cherries as additional snacks for them, but upon seeing her daughter on a rare play date, she chose not to disturb them. It wasn't a common sight to see her daughter get along so well with someone. Royal Princess Duanjia noticed that it was already the middle of the afternoon, so she coughed gently and prompted, Chu Lu, how about I bring you out to eat somewhere today? Chu Lian really didn't know how to react. Royal Princess Duanjia's personality was too different from the norm. When inviting guests to lunch, Wasn't it more natural to eat inside the estate rather than somewhere else? Why was the princess asking her out to eat? Since Chu Lian's response was only a wordless, wide-eyed stare, Royal Princess Duanjia could only pout and add, "Fine. I just wanted to eat Yuehong Restaurant's roast duck. Are you coming or not?" Yuehong Restaurant? It was one of the best restaurants in the capital, and similar to the modern world's famous Quanjude roast duck restaurant, it was also famed for its roast duck. Chu Lian still had her Gillen restaurant to manage. It would be a good idea to take a look at what the best restaurant in the capital was like. She smiled and nodded. Royal Princess Duanjia excitedly sent one of her maidservants off to inform Princess Wei before sending another senior servant to the outer court to prepare a carriage. Royal Princess Duanjia and Chu Lian arrived at the side entrance of Yuehong Restaurant before 11 a.m. The two of them were supported off the carriage by their servants. Chu Lian's eyes widened as she looked around. As expected, this Yuehong restaurant was extraordinary. It was located in the best spot of the whole Zhuke Main Street. There were customers ranging in the hundreds coming in and out every day. From where they were standing, Chu Lian could see that the first floor's main hall was already full. A special waiter ushered them in from the side entrance. Royal Princess Duanjia seemed to be a regular customer of Yuehong Restaurant, as the two of them were guided by the waiter into a private room labeled Heaven. Royal Princess Duanjia rattled off a list of dishes to the waiter, some of which Chu Lian had never even heard of before. She observed how this private room was decorated. It was sumptuously furnished. There were even expensive bonsai trees placed on the side tables next to the window. Although it looked very elegant and high class, she still had to see if their food could match up to the restaurant's appearance. Royal Princess Duanjia rested her chin on one hand while her clever eyes were fixed onto Chu Lian. "Chu Lu, you've never been to a place like this?" Chu Lian hadn't expected Royal Princess Duanjia to be so direct. She simply smiled and shook her head. "I've never been to a place like this before. It's my first time." The original Chu Lian hadn't been on very good terms with the other ladies in her family. She had also been suppressed by her stepmother, so she didn't have much money. Setting aside the question of whether she would even have the chance to leave the estate, she couldn't even afford to tip the servants if she went out, never mind dine at a luxurious restaurant like Yuehong. When Royal Princess Duanjia heard her honest confession, she could guess that her days at the Ingwer estate hadn't been too great. However, seeing that her eyes were bright and clear, without a hint of darkness or resentment, the princess admired her carefree personality even more. "Then eat more today. When we're done, let's go to Deffing Tea House for a bit. I heard that someone will be performing The Phoenix Seeks His Soulmate there today." It was rare for her to find someone she could get along with to go out and play. Chu Lian wasn't too bothered about things like differences in social status either. The two of them were just like two best friends on a shopping trip, so Chu Lian agreed without thinking too much. When all the dishes were served, the hopeful Chu Lian couldn't hold back the twitch at the corners of her mouth. There were over 10 signature dishes on the table, but only the roast duck looked passable. The rest of the dishes were about the same as what she had in the Jing'an estate. On the other hand, Royal Princess Duanjia's eyes were alight as she took in this poor spread. Her handmaid had already started placing pieces of roast duck in Royal Princess Duanjia's personal dish, as well as Chu Lian's. There were 2 other small dishes placed in front of them. One of them was filled with a dark soy sauce, while fine salt crystals were piled on top of the other. Royal Princess Duanjia pointed at the 2 white dishes and said, "Chu Lu, you have to dip the roast duck into the dark soy sauce and the fine salt. It's delicious. Try it out." As she finished speaking, she quickly picked up a piece of roast duck on her plate, dipped it into the sauce, and then stuffed it right into her mouth. Royal Princess Duanjia closed her eyes as she savored it. Upon finishing that one single piece, she smacked her lips like she was recording the flavor into her memory. Then she turned her expectant eyes towards Chu Lian. TL note, I love roast duck, peeking roast duck, roast duck. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.